sleep another night.
Good evening. Welcome to the Board of Selectmen meeting for Monday, January 22nd, 2018. We do have a need for executive session this evening. So at 6 p.m., actually 10 after 6, we'll be going into executive session. We'll be coming out of executive session on or about 6:30, and it'll be an open meeting from that point forward. But at this time, I would ask that we enter into executive session. If someone has a motion to bring us in.
We have a motion.
On the big screen.
Okay. I'll move that the Board of Selectmen vote pursuant to Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, subsection 21A, Clause 6, to go into executive session to consider the value of real property, since an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the board's negotiating position relative to a host community agreement for the Cricket Lane parcel R23-4-A, and to convene an open session thereafter.
This does require a roll call vote. So we've got a motion made. Anybody second that?
Second.
It's moved and seconded. Thank you. Mr. Knox?
I have to abstain, Mr. Chairman, because I have to recuse myself of all things with this land.
Okay. Mr. Gerbig?
Aye.
Aye.
Mr. Glavy, the chair's in favor, so it's 4-0-0 with one member recusing himself. For members that he did get advice from council on that as well, so it is a matter that he will recuse himself on. So, we are now in executive session, so folks, as soon as, stand by your TV sets and
My wife.
be ready for a great meeting. Thanks, Cindy.
Yep.
Sounds good. Boys regular, Gary?
There's some Eagle Scouts out there too.
Is this the real agenda, not the hidden agenda?
That's right.
We'll trust this. It's like that.
You shouldn't.
They're already warmed up.
Illuminati. Okay, we are now back from executive session. I will entertain a motion to close the 6 o'clock meeting.
I make a motion, we adjourn, Keith, correct?
Yeah, adjourn the 6
The
o'clock
6 o'clock meeting.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All right, motion carries unanimously. And so, folks, we did have an executive session that we went into at 6 p.m. For the negotiations for an item that's on the agenda later on today, the Cricket Lane parcel. We are now back in open session. We will start off our meeting, as we always do, with the pledge. Mr. Clerk, if you could please lead us.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Okay, on our agenda this evening, we've got, we'll be reading the mail, then we'll get into a presentation from Eagle Scouts Troop 20. We have a few members of that troop here who have just done their Eagle Scout projects, and we wanted to make sure that they were recognized for their work, and congratulations to them. We next have certification for Planning Administrator Maren Truhill, and at 6:40-ish, we have Council on Aging appointment. We are looking to approve Town Administrator's appointment of Elder and Human Services Director Liz Tretiak. Should have done that beforehand. It's 6:55 or thereabouts. We'll have an opportunity for public input, at which time, if you do wish to be recognized, just ask that you raise your hand to be recognized by the chair. State your name and your address, and any comments should come through the chair. Appreciate that. Opportunity for member updates. Then we'll have a joint meeting with FinCom and the school committee. And the agenda for that portion of that item 4 would be long-range fiscal plan, debt projections. We'll do a FY 2019 operating and capital budget summary, and then we'll get into the FY 2018 snow and ice update. 7:45, town building and space needs analysis presentation. At 8:45 is the Cricket Lane parcel conversation, and then hopefully around about 9:15, we'll approve some minutes and adjourn our meeting. So, without any further ado, Mr. Bergman, if you could lead us in the mail.
Yeah, we have the mail. I would suggest we do the recognitions first, and we'll come to that, but I'd make the special request. Maren Toohill needs to be at a meeting in Harvard at 7. So I wonder if we could just introduce her. Now, there's an Eagle Scout in your family, isn't there?
There is, yes.
Yeah, so we're not taking the Eagles out of order, we're just doing it in the order in which they've arrived. So, I wanna, take this opportunity to, announce, that, our planning administrator, Maren Toohill, has been officially, certified by, it's the American Institute of Certified Planners, AICP, which is the designation that planning directors across the Commonwealth and across the country get as professionals, and that Maren's been here a long time, and she, in recent years, we've talked about the professional development, and this has been something that has been important to the planning board and to Maren and to the town, and I'm just delighted that we've reached this point and that can recognize Maren's achievement of this professional certification. So congratulations.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity and the support. As I was going through the review and the exam process, I have been here for over 20 years, so I'm looking forward to continuing for a very long time. And then I'm very excited about some of the challenges in front of us as we implement the master plan. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Maren. Thank you very much. Congratulations.
Thank you.
All right, so, Casey, if you want to come forward with the scouts, I think we have,
Sure.
so we've got, let's see. Are they?
The names are on the agenda.
So, two of you.
Yeah, Kyle Bonacci, Kyle Store.
I guess that's a good enough. I'll have to talk to Tucker and tell him Kyle's working. All right, so Kyle Bonacci is the member, the scout that's not here. We also have Zach Corelli and Anson Staples with us. And actually, Casey, you want to take the lead here? I've got a summary for each of them if you want me to go ahead and read what their projects were all about. or if you wanna give us
Yeah,
an
so I
overview.
can give you a little bit about the
That'd be
project background. Well, these two boys have been very active in the troop for, I think, about 7 years. I was a Cub Master, so they're very active Cub Scouts. They had a really good Cub Scout career, believe it or not, where they made Arrow of Light, which is the highest honor there. And through our scouting careers, they've attended all the campouts, high adventures, went to New Mexico together, sea base in Florida, Washington DC, New York City, so they've been very active young men, and their careers are culminated by their capstone event, which is their Eagle Project. And Anson here made a kiosk at the Cobb property, Memorial Forest path. Before he built this kiosk, there was just a stapled piece of paper on a stud that told people where they were at. So he worked closely with the Town Conservation Commission to make sure that the kiosk he made met the standard. I think there's a plan now to kind of all make them look the same. And then he did some research and put a lot of publications on it, let people know where they're at and what they're gonna walk into and what they're gonna see, right?
And I just want to take a moment
Please
to
do.
thank a few people. Charlie Ellis, who is my mentor.
Yep.
I also want to thank the Rotary Club of Littleton, and especially Rick Finley of the Littleton Conservation Trust for putting it all together.
Excellent.
Well, yeah, a lot of work went into that project, a lot of time.
That's great.
Zach here, same career path, I mean, because these two are in the same grade and they were in the same pack, in the same troop, and his Eagle project was to build a storage shed for the high school, snow removal equipment. Believe it or not, before this shed was made, all the high school snow removal equipment, so the gasoline and the snow plows were kept in the hallways of the high school. So Zach here knew that was probably not the best way to store the equipment, and,
Chief Clancy, do you know that?
we all knew that, right? So, made a, what is it, 11 by 11 shed, ground up, did a lot of work, prefabbing at his house, things all brand new construction, new paint, and did a wonderful job. And it's if you look at the high school to the right, and that's where all the snow removal equipment, salt, and shovels, and engines and gas go. So did a really wonderful job on that.
And Kyle took it, his project was to repair and paint the dugouts at the high school
Right,
baseball.
yeah,
diamond.
high school baseball field, the two dugouts were in disrepair, faded, they didn't look like, school pride colors. He decided he was gonna fix them up, repaint them, and through the project, we realized that some of those holes were just the wood needed to be replaced. And they replaced the entire roof of the first base dugout side and all new, shingles on the roof. That wasn't part of the original plan, but as, we started peeling back the onion, it was pretty disgusting, and he.
Little glimpse into home ownership.
Right. He's learned,
Start a project.
He's learned his lesson, right, don't buy a house. But so, and same career path, because those three young men have been together in this path together for quite a few years now. I think since they were in second and first grade, they've been together. And so they're I think it's 6 of the 7 that made up together that made Eagle Scouts so far. So we're just waiting for one more of their group to make Eagle Scouts. So it's a really exciting group of young men. So we're really proud of them.
It's positive peer pressure.
Right.
I think I speak for all of us and the community as a whole. We thank you very much for your civic involvement, for giving back to the community by seeing a need and addressing it. And you guys are an asset to Littleton, and we all congratulate you and thank you for your service.
And thank you for your time.
Congratulations.
Good job.
Thank you. Congratulations.
I love the recognition part of the thanks. It's all good stuff.
So quickly, just cover the mail packet. Mr. Chairman, first we wanted to announce that the town is now the proud owner of 22.5 acres of Cooper Farm, parcels A, B, C, and D, which were authorized by the October town meeting. The deed was filed at the registry a week or so ago, and the town is now the owner of that property. So congratulations to us. We do have to say, though, that we put up signs
Thank you.
that indicate it's still an active construction site, so until further notice, so please be careful out there. Next.
Can I just reiterate that, folks, the Cooper property is now ours, but there's a lot of folks that are wandering around and for now, there's no cross-country skiing, there's no checking to see if there's silts coming from that construction site. If you do have any concerns about anything that's going on in the construction site, please come to the town and ask the questions. It is an active construction site, we don't want anybody to get hurt on our property. All right, thank you.
Other than that, enjoy yourself. Soon, before you know it, there'll be
Right.
a lot of activity there. Next, we wanted to recognize that the fire department has been awarded a couple of grants from the state. It's under the Student Awareness of Fire Education, or SAFE program, $3,700, and also the Senior SAFE program, $2,400. This is, I think, maybe the third or fourth year in a row, if not longer, that we've received such funding. So congratulations again to the fire department for getting that. Next, we have received a correspondence from Tracy Cutter announcing that circulating a draft of a proposed petition for town meeting article, which would seek to put a limit on plastic bags in Littleton, or actually limits on retail. I think 61 other communities statewide have already adopted prohibitions of plastic bags, and instead you have to have either a paper bag or you bring your own bags in retail settings. But we have that proposal has been circulated. Tracy had indicated she was going to be meeting with the Sustainability Committee to review. It only takes 10 signatures to get an article on the annual town meeting warrant, so we may well be seeing this on the warrant, but Tracy has also asked if we could have town council look at it or give advice on the drafting of the article, so we have the opportunity to do that. The board will be voting at its next meeting on February 12th to open the warrants for the May town meetings, which would likely close by mid to late March. So there's a window to be able to review and comment on that. And if you're interested in the text of the article, it is included in the agenda packet for tonight's meeting, which is available online. Next, Neshoba Valley Tech High School is announcing its annual budget breakfast, where which will be on February 2nd at 9 a.m. At their facility in Westford.
Yeah, Here are
Tip-
folks go, could
Yeah.
you just add my name to whoever's RSVPing? Bonnie, I know you usually go.
Sure.
Thank you.
Very good. And often we see members of the finance committee there as well, who are welcome to attend also. Treasurer Steve Venuti has provided for inclusion in the packet, again this year, an annual total compensation report. It's, what you have in the packet is a summary of information that went out to or is going out to each employee. We calculate what the direct and indirect benefits are that each town employee has, and then quantify what the value is, and they get a full report. And this is the 7th year that we are sending out that report to the employees.
Mr. Chairman? I think this is terrific. It's wonderfully easy to read, too. I don't know if Steve's here or not.
He is.
But he is, all right. But great document. My only thought is, as valuable as it might be in educating the employees as to the full investment the town's making in them, this information, to have full benefit, I think, to the boards would be better served to come a little earlier in the budget process, so that when we're entertaining proposals, we're, we have at our fingertips what, how a $50,000 position can easily have $100,000 worth of impact to it in the budget.
It's a year-end report, so that, it's issued in January for the figures for the preceding 12 months.
Well,
but
and
we
maybe
can-
perhaps the prior
we can-
year's numbers
yeah, we
can be
can certainly-
presented.
Yeah, we can certainly provide again the document that would have gone out a year ago.
I know that
Yeah.
FinCom does take a look at that. Look at the fringe and.
Yeah, it's the time to read it is not after you've just made most of your budget decisions, but before.
Okay.
And
Thanks.
that is it for the mail pack.
Great. Thank you very much. Next up on the agenda, we have an appointment. All right, yeah. Threw me off with the Marin thing, out of order.
Yep.
So,
I defer to Anthony, who has done a great job in coordinating the search process for filling the position of Elder Human Services Director, and this is the last step tonight.
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, so this process really began back in November, when we went out and first put the job out there. We had 20 applicants, and of which we looked at to interview 5, pared that down to 4 after a phone interview with one of the candidates. And, I really want to thank the committee that sat in and worked on this, because it really is a lot of work. So, and I know they were all here, or I think most of them are here. Marge Payne, Chair of the COA, Mary Hunt, Board Member of the COA, and Mary Picard, another Board Member of the COA. And those were voting members as well as myself that represented the Town Administrator's Office. Non-voting board members was, we had Kathy Shelp, who's the COA Director in Groton, sat in with us as a consultant. We utilized the services of Alicia Day, our Park and Rec and Community Education Director, as well as Ann Esplin, who's one of the best, our HR Administrator. With that, on January 8th, we recommended to the Council on Aging Board
Liz Tretiak as the person that we believed would be a great Director of Elder and Human Services for the town of Littleton. So Council on Aging Board voted and also voted to recommend that to the town administrator, that be his recommendation to the board to adopt here tonight. So with that, Liz is here tonight. Liz is has some great knowledge, over 10 years in the field. She's also has her undergrad degree from Lemoyne College in sociology with a concentration in human services. She also holds a master's degree in clinical art therapy and counseling from Springfield College. With that, Mr. Chairman, Liz Tretiak.
Welcome.
Thank you.
I mean, you've been through the interviewing process, you've run the gauntlet, so it's,
It's been intense.
it's good to hear. Our charges are taking it seriously, and it sounds like we got the best candidate possible, so we appreciate you coming forward, putting your name in. What I'd like to do is just ask you to just kind of tell us a bit about yourself. We've got your resume, we've gotten some input from some of the folks on the board. So if you could just, in your own words, just kind of give us an overview of
Okay.
who you are and why you thought Littleton would be a good fit.
Sure. I've spent the past 9 or 10 years of my career dedicated to helping elders age in place to stay in the community as long as possible, if that's what they choose to do. Over the years, I've made a lot of great contacts. I've been working under the rules and regulations of the Executive Office of Elder Affairs and learning how to be creative under strict regulations, which has been an interesting challenge. I saw this job posted and I thought it would be a great opportunity for me to get back involved in the community. In my current position at an aging services access point, I'm in the executive management team, and I felt as though getting back into the community, dealing one-on-one with individuals, was where I'd be best suited. So this was a great opportunity.
Sounds good. Like I said, you've kind of run the gauntlet already. I don't feel the need for us to necessarily ask questions of you or grill you all over again, but if anybody has any outstanding questions that you'd like to ask, I'd entertain those at this time. Otherwise, I'd seek to proceed with the appointment.
I would like to know,
Sure.
Mr. Tretiak, one of the things that's most impressive to me about your resume is that the career progression here and quickly moving into leadership roles. And I'm very excited based on that progression, it seems the success you've had in various other positions, excited to see what you can do here. So, thank you.
I've been very lucky to have great mentorship in my career so far, so I'm excited to move forward.
I've had the pleasure of being at the COA meeting when she was interviewed by the COA, or grilled by the COA. We had a number of fantastic questions, and I was completely impressed with how you came through, and it was a pleasure to meet her that day. So.
Well, thank you.
I was excited to see that you have some experience with hoarding, so maybe we can get a little.
Yes, yes, that's one of my interests.
I'm not that bad. All right, so thank you very much. This is really, I don't see any point in us putting you through any more pain and suffering. So
No, I'm more than confident that our intrepid townspeople have done the right thing by us by presenting Liz to us. I would, after we make the appointment, want to speak to the process a little bit, but that shouldn't forestall Liz's appointment. So if you're looking for a motion, I can do that.
Please.
I'll move that the Board of Selectmen vote pursuant to Town Code Chapter 3, Section 3, to approve the appointment by the Town Administrator of Liz Tretiak of Hudson, Mass. To the full-time grade 11 salaried position of Director of Elder and Human Services.
Second. It's moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. It's unanimous. Welcome aboard. I truly have to run the gauntlet. Just like
Thank you.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you all that were involved in the process. And I think we're going to have a little discussion about the process at this point.
Mr. Chairman, one more thing before Paul, if you don't mind. I just want to thank Jamie Gutner, who's been standing in as the interim director, and she's really came in. She was the town of Needham's COA director. We're very fortunate to have the time with her. Jamie's going to be staying on for about a month overlap with Liz. So, Jamie, thank you for everything you've done for us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I do appreciate it. All right, before we move on to the next agenda item, Mr. Vice Chair, you did mention.
Yeah,
speak
it's
to the process to some extent.
properly a topic for discussion, more detail at another day, but I would say that, just taking note of the timetable here, the vacancy occurred in early November, the hiring process did on this first go-around since we entered into a board-to-board agreement last spring, I believe it was, with the Council on Aging. I might have the timetable wrong on that. But in any event, a lot of the information that looks very reassuring at the end of this memo, I was prior to tonight unaware of, or prior to getting the packet unaware of the existence of the committee and all that activity. I think we could have been kept in the loop a little bit better on that. Maybe we can do something about that.
On the process and.
Yes.
Okay. Yes,
We can certainly make sure that the board is more in the loop about what the ongoing process is, as we're proceeding.
Point taken. Thanks, Paul. for bringing that up. All right, next we have an opportunity for public input. Anybody that would like to be heard at this time? Sir?
Just kudos to everybody. The new town website
Yes.
is terrific. I discover all sorts of new things every time I go on there. And one of the really neat things is for those of us who show up and to your meetings is to be able to go into the agendas and minutes area and find the complete packet that selectmen get before their meeting, so that you have all the background that you guys are talking about, that most of the time sitting out here, we don't understand. So you can go on there and get all of that. It's really terrific. Good job, Anthony. Thank you so much.
It's a team here, it's not me. But thank you.
Love the humility. Sir, could you please introduce yourself?
Oh,
Just following the
I'm
policy.
sorry. Alan McRae, 14 Coughlin Road.
Thank you, sir.
Now, Alan, do you have Twitter? Because we are on Twitter and Facebook, too.
I don't tweet.
We got enough problems with that.
Sir?
No Republican tweets anymore.
Wow. You sure you want to go, Mr. Wilson?
Right. I just wanted to say that
Your name, please, sir?
Gary Wilson, 1 Wilson Lane, but as Vice Chair of the Finance Committee, we do have a meeting posted for 7 PM, and we do have a quorum, so I just wanted to open that as well. Thank you.
Appreciate it. So always keep me to task. Deputy Chief.
Tom Clancy, Deputy Fire Chief. Mr. Chair, just wanted everyone to know we are back at 20 Foster Street. We're not alone, but we are back there.
Should we be doing something to recognize
So
them?
the people that went to Middlesex this weekend to get burn permits, we're very sorry.
So as far as formality is concerned,
Yes.
I mean, it's open, cloak of darkness, I'm not sure how it happened exactly, but are we going to have some sort of celebration to formally?
Yeah,
Other
the
than-
chief is kind of open once the landscaping is finished in early spring, because right now.
There's still a lot
You
outside.
can Photoshop that stuff in.
Yeah. But I don't want to speak for the chief, so to speak.
Smart man.
So, yes, but there will be some type of opening.
Open house. and
Yes, definitely.
Grand
It's-
opening.
It's a fabulous place, especially.
Yeah, we
compared to
definitely
the
want to
old place.
celebrate it and invite people into it. and-
But, and we also had 5 new paramedics start as well.
ALS.
We're looking to fill the 6th spot soon, but at this point.
Still posted,
Still
closes this week?
And, yes, still posted. So, but it is, very exciting. And just, people that come, just bear with us. We're getting there. So, we can actually use the front door tomorrow, so that's a good thing.
Great.
Excellent.
Fully handicap accessible building, and lots of cool stuff in there. So thanks to the town for funding that, but
Thanks, Terry.
that's it, that's my public input
They
today.
had their soft opening.
Soft opening, yeah.
Hi, Jenna Brownson, Chair of the Library Trustees. I have a book for Joe Knox. Thank him and Kathy for coming for a tour. He was unaware of the fact that the name Knox is in Fox in Socks. So now you have it, it's official.
You made me aware of that.
Now you know.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for coming.
I gotta find my name in the book now, so when I do my.
I'll find one.
No, my given name, Jenna. All right, anybody else like to be recognized? All right, great. Opportunity for member input, Mr. Glavy, you wanna jump in?
I don't want to steal what I'm sure is going to be your thunder, so I'll let you speak to it.
I needn't have any thunder.
No, no, that's
I have
fine.
no problem speaking
I'll
last.
defer. Thank you.
What if I miss it now?
Then I'll grab it back.
All right, fair enough. Ms. Napoli?
I have a cold, I'm not gonna share this evening.
Okay,
I'm gonna try to not speak that much.
okay.
Just an administrative thing on the sewer. So we heard last Friday that Mass DEP approved Weston and Sampson's work plan to do the, I hope this isn't a surprise to the school committee, to do the investigation work at the high school fields. Dr. Clenchey, I think John Harrington was on the email. Right now, that is tentatively planned for February 9th. With a snow date of February 16th. So that investigation is forthcoming with specifics to be determined.
Great. Mr. Knox,
You gonna mention MMA?
go ahead and mention it.
No,
I can piggyback. No, please do.
I'll be real quick. I just want to let the town know that since I've been on the board, and it's been a long time, 2 different times, this weekend, the MMA meetings that was held, it's the first time that all 5 members, and I congratulate our whole committee for going, our administrator, our assistant town administrator, our head of the finance department, the town was represented. I'll let you go from there. But I just want to congratulate everyone for going. That was.
Yeah, so the MMA is the Mass Municipal Association. It's an association that's established for all of the public officials for towns, the 351 towns and cities in the Commonwealth. And once a year, they have an annual meeting. And there's meetings throughout the year with subcommittees and board of directors and that kind of thing. But anytime we look for some guidance on things, it's like the Mass Association of School Committees for the school committee folks. But it's an opportunity not only for us to educate ourselves and become more versed in municipal government, because this is not our full-time, not always our full-time job. It just gives us an opportunity to learn about any number of things. And there was a number of workshops that we were able to attend, and we all kind of looked at what we had the most interest in, and we kind of split up and made sure that we were well represented. And with the 5 of us and the 2 administrators and Bonnie were there. And it was a great opportunity, not only for us to network with other communities and say, how are you guys doing this, and picking other folks' brains. It was a really good opportunity for us to kind of bond as a working group, and to be together socially, and just to get to know each other a little bit better, outside of, in front of the table, not just necessarily behind the table. There was, we were addressed by the governor, the lieutenant governor, a number of secretaries, a number of mayors and select folks from around the Commonwealth, as well as some FinCom members who are doing different things with their chart of accounts. And so it was really an eye-opener for each of us. And some of the members of the board have been around for a long time and seen municipal government for a long time, but I'd be surprised if neither Joe or Paul took anything away from it. I know that all of us took something very positive away from it. I'm going to give a quick shout out to Secretary Ash, who is the Secretary of Housing and Economic Development. He was running around trying to get into as many of these sessions as possible, and Joe and I were at a session with him on Saturday morning, and took an opportunity to go up and try to say hello to him, introduce himself. He's The secretary's done a lot for us, whether it be with the MBTA, the sidewalk over Russell Street, any number of things where we've worked with Mass Work grants through the economic development side. And he knows Littleton, and that's a testament to all of us and our administrators. And he was asking questions about the smart sewer, and got to the point where we were done having our conversation. He took a selfie, the two of us, and so I signed up for Twitter this weekend. So I retweeted it, and I got heckled by a number of people, but it was just a really positive experience. This is the best educational opportunity for us, other than networking with other communities and just kind of doing it on our own.
There we go.
He is 6'6". And he was got a lot of hair. What?
You were not.
And I am not. There was a step behind me going up towards the flag, and I said, "Can't we just back up a little bit?" He wasn't having it.
I heard he was 5'9", but.
I'm in a bucket. I'm stepping in a hole. So it was a really good experience, and
6'3" and 239
what do you want? Oh, 6'6". So, it was, you'll probably be hearing us reference different things that we learned from the conference over the course of the next couple of months, but it was an excellent session. I was going to mention the fire department as well, but I'm glad the deputy was here and that he had an opportunity to do that. That was great. It's great news. I think that's just about it for me. Anything you want to bring back, Paul? Nope. I touched it? Okay, thanks. All right. We do have our joint meeting at 7 o'clock or thereabouts with both the FinCom and the school committee. You guys are open? Yep. So appreciate you all coming out and making me have to get out here tonight. Sorry. You want to help us with this, Bonnie, or?
We've got 3 items, long-range fiscal debt projections, and then the 2019 operating capital budgets, and finally fiscal 2018 snow and ice. And Steve Venuti is starting us off with an update on debt, and this updates, it's in your packet, this updates a presentation that was last made in last April. And one of the board's goals was to have to plan for when the town can take on additional debt, which is what Steve's going to walk us through.
Good evening. When we looked at this last time, we were deciding on the fire station alumni debt, where to place it, how we were going to place it. And I think at that point in time, we were coming up with different scenarios, and we actually found a way to fund it that we're going to be doing that kind of saved us some money moving forward into the capital plan. This presentation kind of piggybacks on top of that. We have our current debt position. The only thing that we've added since the last time we met is we issued that septic bond. It's very small payments. It goes out for 30 years, so it's not much, doesn't impact it very much. But we are issuing the debt service for alumni in March, and for the fire station in May or June. So those are coming up. What we're looking at is a 12-year period, and the charts that we're looking at, and those two projects add $9 million to our total debt service. Total capital spending is a little over $31 million, 31.6. So what we try and do is see if we can issue additional debt for projects without impacting capital, or worst case, impacting the operating budget and shifting money from operating budget over. Potential new projects, we're not going to talk about the SOAR project within this, but potential borrowing amounts. We have the ladder truck coming up, possibly this town meeting. Probably the way, and I think the way Bonnie is recommending funding it is to borrow a piece of that. We also have in the capital plan over the next 5 years or so, the school department put in a request for roofs for the high school and Russell Street at $2.25 million. Potential way that we probably would be funding that is through borrowing, unless we can come up with some other ways to do it or start putting money aside somehow. And then depending on what you decide with Cricket Lane, that's an additional $300,000 that could be placed as borrowing. Those three projects would add $3.7 million to our debt service over this 12-year period.
Can I jump in, Steve?
Yes.
All right. On the ladder truck, 780 is if we were to use the different funding sources that Bonnie presented at the last meeting.
Yeah, but it's a combination of debt and free cash.
Yes, and I actually updated that in the memo after this was created, so we've reduced it because of the, we're gonna borrow fully for the sewer design, so we'd end up borrowing a little bit less than this, but it's in the capital update.
All right.
So it's still $1.25 million, but
The cost of the ladder is,
dual funding. Okay.
The total cost is still $1,250,000.
yeah, I'd like to see that.
And,
Same with the field.
yeah, and what about the $1.5 million for the sewers? I'm not seeing that anywhere.
And
That's just a big ticket item that's right in front of us.
And the Cricket Lane one as well. Just these numbers are, I know you're making assumptions that this is what we would actually end up borrowing, but I'd like to, I don't know if anybody else agrees with me or not, but I'd like to see, the ladder truck is gonna cost us 1.x. And this is based on the assumptions that were made, it's gonna cost us in borrowing this much. The roof, I think that's kinda straightforward, it's 2.25.
Similar to the actual cost for employees that we.
Correct,
Steve produced.
correct, yes, exactly. And the Cricket Lane, $300,000 would be from borrowing, but I'd rather see that if we were to buy Cricket Lane, the price tag is $1 million. So we're still spending town money. That's $1 million from the town's pocket, so there's an impact there. If we're taking it from somewhere else, there's an opportunity cost against that $700,000 using the Cricket Lane property as an example. So that's just to paint the full picture.
And paint the full picture, but what we're trying to do is to show how the borrowing piece of that picture would impact capital. That's all. So that's all. That's why only borrowing amounts were shown.
Okay.
I think Bonnie's presentation on the capital has the full
Has
amount.
more of a summary.
Just
Yeah.
to do this part first.
No, appreciate it.
The next slide kind of throws a projected timeline on some of these issues. Like I said, we'll be bonding the fire station at Alumni Field. Ladder truck will be authorized if it moves forward in this town meeting. Roofs are out in FY '21, and possibly Cricket Lane in February special town meeting. Next page, and you'll be hearing more about, we took that out, okay. Yeah. These projected debt service levels. So this is the current, as you can see, the current capital spending is in the orange color. Alumni and the fire station is new debt service payments, I think, are coming in with our current debt service in blue. And you'll see what those levels are each of the next 12 years or so. So what we try and do is this is the available funds that we have. If we can fit in any other additional borrowing in the time by working things around, we can try and do that. The next slide will show the impacts of some of those first couple of projects, Cricket Lane, fire truck, towards the end, in 29 and 30. There was something out there for replacement for Alumni for $1 million. That's when that would hit way out there. As you can see, the line that shows there is that capital, total dollars that we have now moving forward. So above that line, those first couple of projects, the possibility of Cricket Lane and the fire truck probably wouldn't impact the structure very much. We could probably cover that within these dollar amounts. Once we start to add some of the other things like the roofs, that could be a little more troublesome. Because what we're doing then, if we want to continue to try and fund these things inside the levy, is capital must go, or we're starting to hit the operating budget to funnel more money into this. So I think what we're trying to show here is that there is very little room inside the levy for any additional borrowing.
Okay.
This is our starting point tonight after the presentation on the building needs study that we can also go back to some slides and show what the impacts of those are after we've made that presentation. So, thanks, Steve.
Thank you, Steve. Any questions from the board? Comments?
I'd say that's, everything Steve said is accurate, but it's also reflective of a very aggressive period of building and acquiring everything from rolling stock to land and renovating fields and fire stations, so there's a lot going on there. If that's the new norm, then that's something to be considered. If that's just a period where we've been very aggressive because we're in a very bullish period in terms of revenue streams, then so be it. I also think that we probably ought to start representing sewer in here, if only that people will ask questions about it, although we need to consider that that's a borrowing attached to a funding schedule, which is not the same as the others. So,
And we don't fully understand what the potential funding sources are either. Some of them.
well, hookups.
Well, I'm saying beyond, some of the creative funding,
Right.
as it potentially becomes available.
But at base, 100% of it's reimbursable through the participants.
I guess this is a question for, maybe for Steve. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, that with regard to the sewer project, the town is the guarantor on the bond.
Yes.
Obviously, the people that hook up to it and whatnot will be paying, but if there is a shortfall, the town is the guarantor on that bond. And how does the bonding agent look at that potential debt hanging over us? Do they take that into account when they give us a bond rating, or is that something that is really a non-issue? Because it's a pretty big number, I mean, at the end of the day.
And so is the income generated by it, which I think they take into consideration as well.
I haven't seen a spreadsheet that says what the generation is and who's gonna buy all this wonderful stuff that we're gonna be creating. So, at this point, my concern is if we step up to it and the town is responsible for the bond, does that impact our bond rating? If it does, we ought to know that. If it doesn't, that's okay.
Mr. Chair, please.
Yes, we would be guaranteeing the bond since it's issued by the town. For any shortfall that happens in the funding, in case there's timing differences in the revenue stream coming in or the betterments being paid, the town has to foot that bill.
Which is the case in Concord, Lexington, Harvard, Groton, and those other big risk-taking communities that have sewers.
That's why we're required to set up a separate enterprise fund for the utility, and it would, and it is the case, as the question's been asked, it is the case that if there's a shortfall from the utility, that the property taxpayers are the ones who make up the difference. So the test.
Property taxpayers who are hooked up to it,
No.
or all the properties? So the town is on the hook for any
Right, that,
shortfall.
yeah, we've been asked that question over the years, anytime we've had the sewer, and the answer's been the same, that who's the final guarantor, and it is all of the property taxpayers.
Right.
And in terms of how the bond is paid down, that the intent is, and the marching orders that we have, and the rule of thumb we're going by, is that in order to bring the sewer project forward, it has to be It has to be
Self-funded.
self-sufficient by the users, which would mean that the users would pay for 100% of the betterments for the construction costs, and that the users would pay for 100% of the operating costs on a year-to-year basis. And those are that's our marching orders, and that's what we're going over with the engineering consultant to convince ourselves that we either can or can't do that.
Well, and I don't want to short sell what Weston and Sampson has committed to doing. They're not just the engineering consultants, they also have a component of their firm that is going to assist us on the economics and the financial projections. So the fact that you haven't yet seen a spreadsheet that says, here's what the costs are going to be, is not lost on us in the least, and is something that we're working on and have, more importantly, have a plan in place to begin to answer now that we have more definition to the technical components.
But I'm less interested in the cost, I'm more interested in the business plan for this new enterprise. So that would be the income stream as well, in effect a P&L on what this new enterprise is gonna look like.
Well, and even within that, there are questions that we need to work out about, hookup fees, how might they be financed for a particular property? All of those things build up into the more comprehensive plan that we're beginning to take a bite out of.
Are you planning on having that before May town meeting, before you ask for $1.5 million?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Want to say your hand up?
Yeah, sure. I just also wanted to remind the board that this was the plan on that debt service slide where you saw, our level of spending. And while it seems, bleak to say we can't afford to take on any significant debt for a number of years, that was the plan, and I would label this a success in that we pulled the fire station and alumni field financing inside the levy. And during this period, we've also been able to reduce the amount of excluded debt that's been raised by making additional payments. So I know it seems like, it's unfortunate that you can't throw something significant in there. I think the board's done a lot of work and the town's done a lot of work making that happen, so.
Keith, would you put up the slide, the projected debt service levels with additional projects? What we see here is a black line representing the current funding level. Is there any growth accounted for in this in some way that isn't obvious to us, or is that truly today's funding level projected out without any?
Sure. What we do to create the level is any declining debt service, so as things get paid down, that delta gets funneled into either the capital or future debt service. So there's not a tremendous amount of growth in that, but what's also factored is 2.5% of undesignated fund balance or free cash every year, which is tied to the operating budget. So there is growth.
Which has a projected growth to
Right.
it, okay. So there's a certain amount of growth
Yes.
accounted for.
Not much, but.
Mr. Moore, did you have a hand up? No? Just waiting. Hi, Jeff. Steve. All right. Steve, thank you. Any other questions from the board members? Comments?
No.
Steve, thank you. 4B, move on to agenda item 4B, operating capital budget update. I'm sliding across the aisle here.
So I don't have a whole lot of change from the last update that you had at your prior meeting. I would say that the House 1 budget has not been released yet. Last year it was released on January 25th, so I would expect it would hopefully come out this week, and I would have some more information for you at your next meeting.
The governor told us 3.5% increase.
We'll see what the assessments do, so,
Yeah.
they give it, then they take it
Right.
away, so. So we will monitor that. As soon as I have it, I'll send out an update for you. So at this point, the budget essentially sits at the same level it was at your last meeting. Our level staffing deficit sits at about 302,000. I am cautioning that this level staffing budget is got a lower number for the school department increase that was requested. It was originally programmed at 660,000. Which covers the wages that are required at about 604,000 plus another amount, just to bring it up to a round percentage number. The town mission budget also includes the full $1.3 million increase for the school department and any staffing requests that were requested from other town departments. With that, we have almost a $2 million deficit. And a reminder that with the current projections, which include the new growth that we know for projects that's in the pipeline, the 2.5 and any other adjustments for local receipts, we're anticipating having about $1,984,000 available in additional capacity to spend. But that has to fund all of the town departments, the school department, and the fringe benefits, which cover both town and school employees. And I outlined again the staffing increases, again, which were reviewed at the last meeting. I don't know if you want me to keep going through these again, or if it would help me to recap them again.
I think on the town side, it's okay. I will say that I don't anticipate a whole lot of input from the school committee on the operational side of the budget. For whatever reason, they are just receiving this today, this document from a conversation that I had with the school committee chairman. He didn't have this document, so I forwarded it off to him today.
My apologies. I thought that it was, I read Gary's email and thought that you had sent all of the stuff, so it was only one worksheet that was sent, so that's.
I apologize for that as well.
No,
I
that
sent the
was-
request that I needed numbers from, not
Yep.
the entire packet. I just assumed it went out to all the.
So just as far as any kind of robust discussion this evening, I don't know that is going to take place, and in fairness to the school committee, give them an opportunity to
Absolutely.
digest this and kind of right the ship and help us out, and we'll just
So-
anticipate having another meeting, joint meeting where either we can come to one of your meetings or FinCom meeting, or we can have another meeting that's not posted. We don't have another meeting for a couple of weeks, so 3 weeks,
3 weeks from tonight.
it's like vacation.
Mike's coming to talk about
Something else.
housing starts and student enrollment.
So we'll
Yep. So we
We'll
have,
get- we'll get together.
we do have the spreadsheet that was provided, and I know, Mr. Wilson, you've discussed it already with Mr. Fontanella, about providing the use of other funds like school choice and circuit breaker. There are some that, are known will be spent, but there are other unknowns. So that'll give the picture of the total spending for the department. And then we need to kind of move forward through the end of February, because we need to start formulating harder budget numbers.
It might be worth, though, trying to see if there is a date for a joint meeting. But I'm just looking ahead at our next 2 regular scheduled meetings, and they're gonna be busy. They're gonna be busy, so we might just wanna think about setting up another night, whether,
We're fine meeting. We would prefer to meet prior to your next general business meeting, partly because I'm sure you do have a full agenda.
Yeah.
And this was supposed to be the meeting where we get some of that work done, and it looks like we're not gonna be able to take advantage of that. But also, just the amount of time that will elapse. So we would prefer to avoid that amount of time elapsing before we
We
actually.
could meet at a FinCom meeting or one of
That's
your
fine.
meetings.
Any Monday or Tuesday that works for you guys, we can make work.
after the Super Bowl.
The Tuesday after the Super Bowl at the
Whatever
school
works.
committee.
And, if you wanna do it now, that's fine, or if you just wanna do it, via email to get the calendars lined up, that's fine too, whatever works.
So with that, I can go over the capital.
Yeah, let's do that.
Which has also really not changed, with some minor differences from the last meeting. I went through the capital plan after you last met 2 weeks ago. I made the adjustments for the sewer costs and the borrowing on it, which freed up $300,000, because we were originally appropriating $300,000 to fund the sewer project. So I instead used that $300,000 towards the fire ladder truck to reduce the borrowing costs. So in this, again, I would reiterate, we had about $5.6 million in requests. This plan here would fund, not all of that, obviously, we don't have $5.6 million. But the funding plan here would fund a total of $4.8 million in project costs, and it would include some borrowing. None of the items under the police department have changed. None of the items under the fire department have changed as far as projects undertaken. You can see 2C does change the funding on the ladder truck to be $355,000 by appropriation, and the use of $415,000 from capital stabilization and $480,000 in a short-term borrowing, or an additional appropriation from capital stabilization if we fund it. And I'll go through that at the end of the memo.
Can I just interrupt here, just?
Yeah.
And I realize, I don't want to put Deputy Chief on the spot here, and it may be a conversation I should be having with the chief, but I'd like to see, if we could, another option for a ladder. I know this ladder is for the full tower truck, and I just want to try to see if there is another option for us to put before the taxpayers. If there's a stick truck versus the full tower with the bucket, just to see what the impact would be. I mean, if we can, I just want to look at options, I guess. If that's possible. I'll let you convey that, and I'm sure I'll get a phone call. But I think that's something we need to take a look at, because we just, was it engine one that we just replaced? It was a pretty big capital expense, and I don't know, I realize it is in 1988, and it's costing us about $20,000 a year in maintenance and repairs. But I want to have a full and robust conversation about that expenditure.
It's funded at the $1,250,000 that was requested at this point, so there's going to be a change to that, I have to adjust. No changes under highway from what was presented previously. The school department, no changes. It's a total of $331,600 for the benefit of Mr. Fontanella. The Chromebook and technology replacements is funded at $135,000. School resource materials at $100,000. AED devices at the high school fields and track for $6,600. Washer and dryer replacement at $5,000 with installation and new equipment. Playground mulch replacement at Shaker and Russell Streets at $15,000. The lighting control system at $15,000 at the high school parking lot. And snow removal truck for $55,000. This was just in the priority order that it was requested. So the total's $331,600. Cemetery, no changes from the last meeting. And I do know that Alicia has started to, Alicia Day, our Park and Rec Director, has started to make inquiries and applications for CPC funds for some of her requested items, as we had recommended. So I'll provide that once we have the applications formalized.
Can I jump in again? Just relative to some of the expenditures, and I don't know if you guys have investigated this or not, but as far as the AED devices, are there any grants available, or have we solicited any kind of donations from Emerson Urgent Care?
We'll work with the fire department and see what's available.
All right. Even, I'd say that maybe one of us should reach out to Emerson, where they have the new urgent care in town. They might be willing to make investment in the community, and even if we get one AED, it saves us something, you know. It's just, and Mike, maybe you and I can have a conversation around that and do a reach out.
Yep.
And,
No, we're happy to participate in any of those efforts to try to defray the burden on the town budget.
Yeah.
Give us a chance to do something else.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Mr. Chair? Yeah, please. Bonnie, you had mentioned with the recreation and CPA funds, you said multiple requests, or plural or something.
I'm not sure if they're gonna
We're expecting more than just one request for the bathhouse, or are we looking at additional requests?
They had two requests that could be eligible for CPC fundings. One was for fields development, and one was for the bathhouse. So I know that they've got the application. I'm not sure which project. I believe it's gonna be the bathhouse, but I haven't seen the formal application yet.
And do we expect that the other one may show up here if?
The fields isn't in here as a funded project at this point because of the magnitude of some of the others.
Sure.
So it would be pushed until the next fiscal year.
Okay.
At this point, or when they decide to request it again.
Thank you. And just, go ahead, Fred, sure.
Yeah, as a member of the CPC, with that hat on right now, the Park and Rec group has come in and talked to us about if in fact they come forward with the quote bathhouse, you know, does that fit the four corners of CPC funding? And we fed back that yes, it does. However, we don't have enough money in the recreation bucket, if you will. So some of the undesignated funds would have to be used along with the recreation funds to fund that project. It's, again, just full disclosure here, just so that you don't think that there's a bucket of money there that we can just.
That could potentially cover the
Yeah, so
entire
that
thing
it-
without some.
Yeah, we basically drain the recreation funds plus some of the undesignated, which will really draw down anything that's in there, so just be aware of that.
If I could just, there's a changing of the guard with Deputy Chief stepped out and the Chief, Fire Chief just stepped in, and just out of courtesy, I did bring up a question about the capital expenditure, 1.25 for the tower ladder truck, and I did ask if there was an opportunity for us to have an option for what a stick truck would cost versus the ladder truck. So I know that Bonnie's been very creative in trying to find ways to soften the blow, but by softening the blow, that money's being taken from somewhere else, which eliminates the opportunity for that money to be used for something else potentially. So I just wanted to give you the courtesy of saying that with you in the room, and if you have any comments and you want to address it right now, that's okay, I don't expect you to, but if you want to, I'd give you that opportunity.
No, I just, over the last 2.5 years, we've had the opportunity to meet with all of the different vendors and really look at the difference between a straight stick and a tower ladder. And it really boils down to safety, and it's about a $200,000 to $225,000 difference between the two vehicles. With a tower ladder, it gives, the department a safe working platform. For a small town, or for a small department, I should say, we do a lot with minimal equipment and with minimal staffing. We're not lucky enough, to be like, Brookline East and have, 34 people per shift. We do a lot with 4 to 6 people per shift, and we have that ability to, really, like I said, do a lot with a minimal amount of equipment, but if we could do it with a safer, and that being a tower, gives us a solid working platform. If we had to conduct rescues, we could actually go to a 4th floor and put 3, 4, 5 people on that and lower them to the ground, compared to taking them off of ladders. In addition to that, it gives us a safe spot to buckle in and work off of, like when we're doing ventilation operations on a roof or a chimney fire, things like that. So a lot of it really boils down to safety. And when you look at the big picture, it's a 30-year truck. So it's not like we're looking for something to say, hey, 15 to 20 years, yes, I agree, it's a big chunk of money. But for the safety factor and looking at the big picture over that time, it's in our eyes, we feel that it's kind of a no-brainer. But, again, it's up for debate, and
Yeah.
I'm glad to discuss it more.
Yeah, I think that it's probably more appropriate for us to do it offline. I have certainly plenty of comments that I could make right now to rebut some of that, but I'm not looking to get into a debate over it. I just I'm looking for opportunities for cost savings. And with us investing in Engine 1 was the newest piece of equipment? Was it Engine 1 or Engine 2? It was just.
Engine 2, we just did, yep.
So with minimal staff and with minimal equipment, maybe we should have been a little more diligent, gotten the ladder instead of Engine 2, and if we didn't need to have, if we only have 4 people, how many pieces of equipment are we truly rolling? And
Well, we rely on our call department as well, and, with that minimum amount of staffing, we do try to have the appropriate amount of equipment on scene for us to do the job effectively. So I give kudos to the guys at doing that, and,
We all do.
we still really rely on the call members to show up, and without them, we would really rely on mutual aid a whole lot more. So to have the proper tools in the toolbox, it makes everybody else safer and more effective.
Thanks, Chief. Ms. Cliff?
I forget the details or how long ago it was, but I believe the first time we got into the business of owning and operating a ladder truck, a good portion of that project was paid for by one of the commercial industrial tenants in the town because it was of particular importance to them. We have even more companies in town now that I'm sure that are deriving benefits, if nothing else, in their insurance premiums because we own the ladder truck, and I wonder whether, if approached, they might be willing to pony up as opposed to, see their premiums go up because we don't have a ladder truck. There's a number of ways of approaching that subject, but, maybe some of these, Fred, I'm looking for one of the old hands in the finance department, remembering wasn't the first one Digital, it goes back far enough that Digital bought it. So.
And they built the building.
Didn't help them in the long run, but helped us. So with all the tall buildings that have been getting, developed at the Point and other places, worth the discussion. Yeah. The hotel, if nothing else.
Sure. That's good. Good point. Mr. Kirby?
Another question for Chief, if he doesn't mind. If we were to go with a less expensive piece of equipment, to what capacity could mutual aid fill in the gap if we were at in one of the scenarios in which the more expensive piece of equipment would be particularly useful? Do we have the ability to access mutual aid in that scenario?
We do, just like any incident, but it boils down to time. So our arrival on scene, we have the ability to start acting immediately. This truck would be not only a tower ladder, but it would also have a pump on it. I believe strongly in having a multi-purpose vehicle that can do many things, and having that roll out first or second to a scene allows us to start conducting rescues and fire suppression right away. Whereas you request mutual aid, once you arrive on scene, you're 7 to 10 minutes before additional help arrives. So when we have that ability to be on scene with that equipment and staffing, we can actually accomplish a lot in that short period.
Yeah, for now, I mean, I think this is something we'll probably.
I think it is a continuing discussion. I think you're right. All right, Chief, thank you. Just didn't want you to think that I was saying it behind your back or anything, so I just full disclosure. Good, thank you. Bonnie, it's back to you, thanks.
And the only other change was I did, under Section 8, sewer feasibility and design at $1.5 million with a borrowing, as a borrowing authorization. We paid out of the eventual sewer investment. And another area that I wanted to discuss is future funding. So we typically do a release of overlay surplus, or there might be some unexpended snow and ice monies available in the fall town meeting. It's helpful sometimes to have an idea of, if funding becomes available, what your priorities might be. So if there are things that are not funded here from the original requests, or if we should change some of the funding, as an example, the ladder truck, if we decided just fund it from the balance in the fall, if there are additional funds available, we could do that. Or we could just put additional funds that might become available to stabilization funds and other reserves, which we've done in the past. And further, we're kind of at the opportunity now to talk about additional reserve appropriations. Under our financial policies, we have a way of allocating what comes out as our free cash, our undesignated fund balance. So this is something that's certified every year by the Department of Revenue. And it's made up of unexpended funds that were appropriated and revenues that were not programmed. Under our policies for the last 10 years, we used to have really zero in this fund. And in prior years, I think right before my arrival, we had negative free cash at one point. Negative free cash must be raised and fixed. So we worked on a long-term plan through the financial policies to build up a reserve in this fund. And what it does is, if the governor comes out with 90 cuts in March, you don't have to go back to town meeting and make draconian cuts into your operating budget for the full year. So you have 3 months to make up a year's worth of cuts, which can be devastating in some years. By having a reserve balance of free cash in your fund, you don't have to do that. You'll need to deal with it in the following year, but you can ride out the year without having to make those adjustments. So our operating policies right now state that we have to keep 5% of the total operating budget in unappropriated free cash. So that's about $2.324 million. addition to that, once we've met that, which we do, we need to make sure that we have 5% of our operating budget fully appropriated into our current stabilization fund, so the general stabilization fund. So we make small appropriations into that each year to make sure that we maintain that balance. So this year, I'm estimating that we need to do approximately $50,000 to keep that 5% reserve there. Appropriating out of the stabilization fund can be done at town meeting. It requires a 2/3 vote to appropriate out, and it's a majority vote to appropriate in. And the bond rating companies look very closely at this to make sure that we're following our policy of keeping that, and we do. After we've met those two requirements, then we look at if we still have free cash, because you might not. You look at what we can spend next, which is on capital. So we allow 2.5% of the operating budget amount, which in this case would be $1,162,000, to be used for capital. We combine this with another $1.5 million of retired debt service that we've been, keeping aside and not letting go to the operating budget. So that's how we fund our $2.5 million capital plan each year in appropriations. That's typically where we stop in most years. We don't go past that, and whatever balance is remaining rolls to the following year. So it's been a few years since we've kind of gone past this line here into section B that you can see in this sheet. But I think, we're comfortable if the board wants to do this. The benefits of doing this is once you appropriate it into a stabilization fund or another reserve, it's there for further appropriation. If you don't, it remains in free cash, and you cannot appropriate it until it's recertified in the following year. And it takes, sometimes the timing doesn't work. If you need something for a town meeting, I might not be able to get it appropriated. If it's sitting in a stabilization fund, you can get it. And you can look at it and see what the balance is, if you've got projects that you're particularly eyeing. So if we want to go past that line, there's a few things in the policies that have to be met first. The first one is we have to maintain a higher level of unused free cash. So we have to go to 7.5%, which instead of $2.324 million would be, $3.486 million. So it's just saying if you're going to keep spending, you got to keep a higher minimum balance in there. And again, this is in the financial policies. So if we do that, we figure out what is the excess balance. So the balance above our benchmark is $3.4 million. So that's what we can appropriate into other reserves. There are some requirements. 20% of the excess balance would need to go to OPEB, or $696,000, which helps us further meet our obligations in the future. And that would leave just over $2 million that could be appropriated to other reserves, which include all stabilizations. Regular stabilization, the debt exclusion stabilization fund, and the capital stabilization fund. There's no requirement in the policy on which one they need to go to in whatever levels, but it says to other reserves that include stabilization. So that's where you start your savings plan for other projects. And then once we do that, there's an additional shakeout balance at the bottom of that $696,000. So that could be further appropriated for another project. So it's a good problem to have. I would caution that this isn't a one-year thing. This is like a 3-year buildup of free cash.
Before we hit that 7.5%.
Correct.
That is correct.
Yes. So we drew it down a few years ago to fund, to put money aside for the fire station, which we put into the stabilization account, and then we withdrew it out to use for the fire station financing. So this is a 10-year accumulation of funding overall, with the exception of that $3 million withdrawal. So I want to caution you that this isn't something that happens every year. This is an accumulated balance. But I think it would be a good idea, and I think for the board's planning on future capital, to just go through this formula each year when free cash is certified, and get the warrant articles in place for the special town meeting in May, and just appropriate these dollar figures as part of our normal policy. And that way they're in your savings accounts. So if something came up in the fall, or in February, or any special occurrence, it would be in an account that you could point to and access if.
Because even if we have many $million in free cash, that once it's spent, we have to wait till it gets certified before we can spend it again.
Once you cross
That's
July
once a year,
1st,
yeah.
it goes away. So, and then it takes months to get it recertified. I have to close the books, I have to submit all the balance sheets. That happens in November.
Just be careful about saying it goes away. It doesn't go away, it becomes unavailable.
Unavailable.
For a period of time.
Right.
Unavailable.
Yes.
Yes, better.
A finite
better said.
period of time.
Yes.
Right.
So I just think that this is something, you know, we're kind of at that level now where it would be helpful to roll through this each May town meeting, appropriate the money away, and then you can use it in the same town meeting if you wanted to, but just to get it aside so that you have some hard balances in your reserves.
You guys have any comments, questions? Yeah. So you guys are still thinking and formulating. It's kind of a FinCom question, the impact to our bond rating, and I'm assuming positive.
Yes.
And
It would be the same, essentially. The bond rating agencies look at free cash and stabilization all together as reserves. So just shifting it from one account to another wouldn't necessarily change the rating. If you then withdrew a big chunk out of it, they would, you know, maybe
So-
look at that as in part, in your big picture.
it led me to a different question. We've got a very good bond rating. There's always room for improvement. What things can we do to get a better bond rating with a different agency, or how can we improve? And I'm not looking for you to rattle off the answer. I'd like to, that's one of our goals. I think it should be something that we're always looking to do.
We have the
And I
best
know that
bond
it's
rating.
something that,
Yeah, with Standard & Poor's, we have we're a AAA, and there's no higher rating with Moody's, with the other one.
Moody's?
Was it?
Moody's,
Moody's, we're not able to because they view,
yeah, they look at municipalities a little differently than Stanley and Poor's does.
okay.
So it's very hard for a community to get their highest bond rating.
Particularly at our size.
Like cities.
They look to more cities for that.
Okay.
If we were any better, we'd be offshoring our money.
You know, if I may, so there's nowhere to go but down is the answer. So where are we looking to trend right now, right? Which is you maintain, so that's kind of where we're at right now. I think we're doing that, I think we can agree, but it's not that hard to go the other way, I'm sure. And, you know, when they come out every couple of years, where will we be? But unless anybody else has.
No, I mean, the other piece of that equation is, as Steve reminds us all the time, is the fact that you have policies and you follow those policies. That's huge. And so that's the other piece of this, and so we need to make sure that we do that as well.
Big part of the rating.
the other opportunity that you might have by putting some more money in, I would especially point to, say, like the debt exclusion stabilization fund, if you're going to put money anywhere, the degree to which we recognize that we're going to take on additional capital projects for, you know, whatever sort it might be, if we can point to the specific savings account that we've set up to reduce that debt, which is specifically what we've done now for at least 3 years in a row, where we can then point to the voters that because of applying those funds, we reduced what the tax rate was and what people's tax bills were by a measurable amount over what it could have been on that excluded debt, because the liability for the excluded debt is a total amount, and we've reduced it now, was it, this year, was it 14?
1.4 million?
It was
19 cents.
19 cents off the tax rate. So, and this is the, you know, and that's a trend. Some of the projections that we've seen from Steve in the past are, you know, the degree to which we're relying on future debt or being able to reduce future debt that we want to undertake, and the stabilization, the debt exclusion stabilization fund is one place we could think about putting money as
Yeah,
a
absolutely.
payoff for that debt.
I'm in full support of this, and I also think it's worth reminding folks, if it weren't apparent, that this is an annual vote. So if we do it, and for whatever reason, unforeseen, you know, FinCom, selectmen decide they don't like how it works, it has to be reauthorized annually anyways, right?
You can roll through this formula each year, and if it doesn't
But-
happen, then it stays.
You have to vote it every year, right? Yes, okay.
Jenny Blair, 18 Boxborough. So this is the first time I've seen the town budget or anything like that, so this may be a totally dumb question, but listening to the numbers, it seems like the town's in a really great financial position right now. And listening to how you're putting money into savings or have money that you could appropriate to things, but you may not have found it and it goes away for a little while, right? Can the town, is the town allowed to do investments that are super secure, that roll, kind of like a CD, but hopefully with some better interest rate, to help offset the amount of taxes that we pay, but also using that money actively instead of it just sitting in these different accounts? Is there anything like that? Can you do that?
One of you want to take that one?
Every dollar the town has is invested in some form, and the interest goes into the general fund.
Oh, awesome, that's so great.
Question? Thanks. All right. So,
Do you want to try to pick a date, maybe, for,
Sure.
I guess, to have another joint meeting?
Is there a reason we can't vote on this piece first? So we holding this first?
Oh, yeah, well, yeah, you can watch us vote on snow and ice. The next motion is, for the selectmen
all right, so what are you referencing, Paul, the snow and ice?
Yes.
All right, do we have,
This is a procedural vote that our funding plan for snow and ice is a total of $650,000, of which $200,000 is in the operating budget. $450,000 is basically the amount that we can add on to a future year's tax levy. We must have, with the last snowstorm, we must have busted through the 200,000 ceiling.
We haven't been billed yet for the.
Yeah, we were at 160 before last week, so. So it'll be time to take the procedural vote that allows us to deficit spend snow and ice, and know that we've already accounted in our spending plan to cover about $450,000 in deficit spending.
okay, Clay?
Then I'll move that the Board of Selectmen vote pursuant to Mass General Law, Chapter 44, Section 31D, to approve incurring expenses in excess of the available appropriation for snow and ice removal for fiscal year 2018.
Second.
Moved and seconded, all those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Condition, it's unanimous. Thank you very much. All right. All right, number 5 on our agenda is the town building and space needs analysis. I believe Mr. Ansaldi has dedicated a great deal of his life to this. And will be, I thank the FinCom and the school committee for coming out, appreciate it, and actually Keith mentioned, we want to try to set a date.
We'll do it offline. You guys, go ahead with your meeting.
And you may be interested in this topic. This is a big one.
Space needs study?
We got a caucus.
You got a little bit. You put a little space aside with the school.
Kelly, we're gonna get you a trailer out back. Not the,
The scouts did a nice job on those. Just build a little shed.
kiosk for the school department. All right, so you want to go through the whole story, or do you want to give me a little primer? I mean, I think everybody knows that we went out to bid, didn't get any takers. We went out to bid again. We had a couple of people come in, and Alan Lee Associates
Yeah, I'll
was the,
briefly go over those.
yeah.
I just don't want to exclude my partner here. I want
sorry.
Sharing out the joy.
I'm running the clicker a second.
I'd like to thank Chris Stoddard for all of his effort in this. I know that he was the
Chris did a lot of work.
carrying most of the water. He had to just get in the glory.
Yeah, that's cool. We'll go with that.
Chuck, we can't hear you back here. Nothing.
Okay, I'll try to speak up. The mic doesn't project. I apologize. I'm usually accused of being very soft-spoken. But, so the next item on the agenda is the space needs study. And Mr. Ansaldi and Mr. Stoddard are going to bring us through a presentation. So, speak up.
All right, sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I'm not speaking up.
There are some seats in the front, too, if you think you might be better able to hear.
All right. Next time, Chris. So the content, just to take you through with this study that we're gonna be doing, slides 3 through 6 is just a history of the project. Slides 7 and 26 is kind of like the executive summary that we put together for the purpose of presenting this tonight. And then slide 27 was an alternate phased approach that I'll talk about when we get to that. Next slide, thanks, Chris. So this all started coming to play back in November 16, 2016 fall special town meeting. Article 5, the allocated $20,000 for the town to put together a study to look at the space needs. An RFP went out in March of 2017, I'm sorry. 17 firms requested the RFP. 2 firms bid on that RFP. I'm sorry, 0 firms bid on that RFP because what we determined, and, let me go to the next slide too, Chris. What we determined is based on the dollar amount that it was too much work for a $20,000 study. So on April 10th, the Board of Selectmen voted for a year-end transfer of $30,000 to add to that $20,000 to up the ante per se to $50,000. Simultaneously, Chris put together another RFP, actually with Bonnie at the time, and we went out to bid. 25 people requested it, and only 2 bid on it, and 2 were Gienap Designs of Danvers and Alan Lieb Architects of Linfield. After we formed a committee to review both proposals and speak with references, Alan Lieb was awarded the contract.
Gienap was from Danvers too, so you gotta be careful of anything from Danvers, right?
You mean like Secretary J. Dash?
So then on May 17th, we need to go to the Permanent Municipal Building Committee to authorize the awarding of that contract to Alan Lieb Associates, and they did so by a vote. All right, so the report, what he was looking at when he was doing this is some of the items that originally the RFP identified 3 in particular areas where we wanted to make sure that he focused on, besides the rest of the town. Those 3 areas being the library, the Council on Aging, or EHS, and then the Parks and Recreation. And then there was a bunch of different goals and considerations that we wanted him to take into account when he was doing this: efficiency, flexibility, accessibility, appropriate image, fitting in with the town, security, cost considerations, and then the scope of the work. Now, he did this by giving questionnaires to each department head. And the department head took the time and prepared the questionnaires. We turned them back into Alan Lieb's office. He evaluated them, came out, and then he met independently with each of the departments. At that point, he took in the questionnaires, and then through the interview process, he came up with a summary of what each department would need going forward for square footage. And that's, you'll see later on another slide, which comes up with the square foot tabulation of the existing space they had and the space that they would need. And we looked at this study, we asked them, the need is not for just today, the need is for 20 years down the road. So then the last thing we had them do is estimate cost for construction. All right, the square footage report. The first thing I want to just bring everybody's attention, there was an error that I think Mark, is Mark still here? You actually pointed it out. It's with the maintenance department, it said existing was 0. That was a mistake. It was actually 14,000, same number, before and after. But if I can run down the slides, and basically most departments need additional space, but the 3 that really stick out as the net difference, not the percentage-wise, but the net difference, was in fact the 3 departments that were identified as taking a real close look at, and that being the library is the first need for more space, Elder and Human Services was the second need, and then Park and Rec was the third need. And the school is right up there, but those three.
Based on square footage.
Based on square
Not
footage.
percentage.
Yes,
Change.
based on square footage. All right, so then he had to do cost construction tabulations. So the first column is what's the building components. The second column is, in the first four, is it four? Yeah, first four columns is what the dollar amounts that the architect came up, Alan Lee. So the second column is the dollar amount per square foot, the cost per square foot. The cost factor is basically taking into consideration,
Contingency?
yeah, contingency. Thanks, Keith. And then what we did is just a simple math there. You get the estimated cost per square foot. And then he goes out and gets two other estimates from third-party estimators on each of those components. So as you can see on the bottom, he came up with $403 a square foot. The other estimate one, was $357.86, and the third estimate was $395. So what he did is basically took an average of the three to come up with the cost. Next slide.
He has to change the size.
All right, so, originally when I discussed this a while back, before we had the dollar amounts, there was three options that we were looking at. Option one was really the baseline, is the new library on the slope site, renovate the existing vacated library space to turn it into some office space, and renovate the rest of the existing town offices. That was option one. Option two was look at moving town offices to a different site, renovate the existing town offices for remaining departments. That should say, it should just say build an addition. It shouldn't say renovate existing library. That was gonna be build an addition for the library, just basically almost a 10,000 square foot addition. Option three was pretty much no library on the slope site, town office stays where we are. We're gonna stay in this complex and we're gonna do some renovations to the existing town offices. Add the addition on to the library, plus an addition on to this building that would meet the needs of all departments. So these are conceptual floor plans. Really don't wanna get too hung up on them because it doesn't mean much other than we would never submit this to any contractor to do work for us so.
What we needed was a picture of how many square feet we physically need, and that's what these are, so.
Right.
Office locations they're just something as a picture for us to have a frame of reference on how many square feet. Exactly.
So that was what, in option one, first floor would be, second floor.
But these all do at least satisfy the square footage requirements?
That's correct, yes.
Square footage and usage needs. This is the third floor, so there's the cost.
All right, so here's the cost for option one.
The cost for the slope site is what we took off of the website, so those aren't numbers. Alan didn't do estimates based for the proposed new library, so.
Right.
Because you had those numbers.
We already
We
have
those from the library. So we know that's the first bullet. Second bullet, if we renovate the library was to vacate their space, and we converted that into other usable space to meet everybody else's need, that was a little over $10 million project. We still needed to renovate the existing town offices to meet everybody's needs. So that was a $12 million, almost $13 million. So the total cost of option one, including the grant, would be $30 million, just over $30 million.
And these are in 2020 numbers.
Right.
Because that's what the projected grant was for, so we forecasted the numbers off.
All right, so option two talked about moving town offices over to a commercial building if we were able to acquire something. So this is just basically approximately 20,000 square foot rectangle office building. First floor, second floor. Now, we're still gonna renovate this building, so that's the first floor here, second floor, and the third floor. So here's the cost of this. All right, so if we were to gain, or look at commercial property of approximately 20,000 square feet and renovate that to meet the needs of town offices, town hall, that would be just over a $7 million renovation, and that excludes the acquisition of the building, whether it be if we were to buy something or if it was even a lease at that point. The second bullet is renovate the existing town offices, and that pretty much always remains the same, at just a little over, almost $13 million. And the next bullet is an addition, that's that less than 10,000 square foot addition to the library, which is just shy of $5 million. So the total cost of option 2 would be approximately $25 million. Option 3.
I don't know, batteries dead maybe?
Okay. So option 3 is basically, like I mentioned, everybody stays put here, we're gonna see what we can do, make do, and build a couple of additions. So this would be an addition off to the back of this building, or if you consider that the front of this building. And there would be that bridge, you'll see it referred to in different areas, is the bridge between the new building and the existing, yes. So that would be the floor plans. Alright, so option 3 cost, still $12 million, almost $13 million to renovate town offices. If we were to build that roughly 20,000 square foot addition to town office, that would cost a little over $9 million. And to build that addition to the library less than 10,000 square feet is still at almost $5 million. So the total cost of this option would be approximately $27 million. So here's a summary, option 1, option 2, option 3. So this is something that Alan Lee did not do. This was in discussions with the Gold Champions, members of the Board of Selectmen that were Gold Champion, Chris Stoddard, and myself, Keith. We sat down and talked about, is there something else we can do? Just saying, if we were able to acquire a parcel of land in town, we could actually do what a lot of communities do, and there's, I believe Shirley, was it Shirley that we went to, that has separate buildings on a big parcel of land, I think, Norfolk, like a campus setting.
Norfolk.
So in doing that, we could even phase in this approach if we couldn't take on something like this all at once. Because they're separate buildings, we could somehow, at some point, attach them with enclosures so you don't have to walk outside between them. But, so if we were to do something like this, the estimated cost on, I'm gonna go from right to left, so that's the library first. If we were to build a building with just shy of, say, 23,000 square foot building, with that $410 amount, that would be $9.375 million. If we reapplied for the grant under this proposal and got, and I used the 45% because that's what was on the original grant application, so that would be a $4 million grant from the state, so the taxpayer cost would be $5 million for the library. Town hall, school administration, we would need 30,000, a little over 30,000 square feet. Again, just using that same $410 price tag per square foot, that's a cost of just shy of $12.5. And to the left would be a multi-generational center, including LCTV in there. That would be just shy of 27,000 square foot building at $410 a square foot, so that would be just shy of $11 million. So the total estimated cost would be $28,595, which interesting about this too is that if we were to acquire, say, a piece of land and somehow if we included some kind of housing component, now we could also be eligible for some of the housing money that the governor had just announced, as well as a possible MassWorks grant. So something like this has a potential to get more grant funds from the state. Steve, you want to go back to?
Yeah, let me call up Steve's slides. And these are slides that Steve had costed out for options 1, 2, and 3.
I should be able to one right before that, please.
See the
Timeline.
Oh, the timelines, okay.
Okay, so Anthony was just talking about options 1, 2, and 3. Just to put them on a somewhat of a timeline, the only one that really looks like anything that we could probably base things on is option 1. If the library was to receive notification that they were awarded the grant to go to town meeting in November of 18, for example. Checked with Sam, he said construction would begin 1 year after they received notification. So that puts us out into 2020 for construction of the library. That project would have to complete before we could do anything with this building, so we put in a 2-year delay on that. So we're talking 2022 before anything could possibly start here. You put a 4.5% inflation rate on those costs, which is, I think, what Alan Lee had on his projections from now until 2020. So that pushes the cost up just a bit on each of these projects, since we're talking inflated dollars. Option 2, we wouldn't be waiting for the library. We could start doing things as early as FY19 and pushing it out that way, and same thing with option 3. The dollars, we go back to those original slides that we have, and each one of these 3 options basically shows the same thing. When these projects will be phased in, starting with the library, moving forward for option 1. And you can see the levels that we're talking about. It's something that certainly would have to be done as an exclusion vote for any of these options. We'd be draining our capital plan totally if we tried to do anything inside the levy for these costs. You can see the debt service for option 1 is in the light blue. The numbers right there on the first line. And the other plans, option 2 and 3, show the same types of levels. Again, with the 4.5% cost inflation rate for when we start construction. The average cost is listed there also, each year for debt service, so the numbers are pretty large.
Heard a bunch of gulps.
Can I ask a question?
Of course, please.
On the alternative phase approach, that didn't include the cost of purchasing the land?
That's correct.
Okay.
Another thing that's not, that we can take into consideration too is some of these plans may require to relocate staff, so you would have that additional cost too.
Right.
During construction.
Yeah.
Which, just looking at the library's cost estimate
Regardless.
was a pretty substantial sum associated with the renovation options. In fact, I think it might have been part of the driver of the subsite, so it should be a good question.
If I can say too, I mean, just let everyone know how preliminary this is. A lot of this information, I was one of the person in charge of this goal. I didn't get to see a lot of this until last week, and some of these charts I'm seeing right now, so it's really preliminary.
as far as construction costs too, on some of these plans, it could be different if it was handled in a different way, and I'm just throwing this out there. You take, if we were able to find a piece of, a property that was different, and maybe the owner would want to do the build it on his own and lease it to us, there's other kinds
There's
of
all
options.
different things.
Yeah, this is so preliminary, that the construction costs on some of these phases could go down drastically as what's proposed right there too.
Yeah, if I could to add, if I could to add to Selectman Knox, he's right. This is really the 30,000-foot view of this project. Because if, on a $30 million or a $25 million project, you're looking at 10% for design fee. You know, we spent $50,000. We got a study, I think it identified the needs that each department has, but it's really from up there, folks. You know, there's so much work that would still have to be done to go forward with this.
Please, 2 questions.
Is there a reason why Alan Lead or somebody from the architect firm's not here tonight making this presentation, be
He
available
couldn't
for
make
questions?
it, yeah.
Do we still have a relationship with them? Are they done with us? So if we have follow-up questions?
If we have follow-up questions, we
Yeah,
can, yeah.
we've exhausted the contract money, but they're more than willing to answer questions if we had some.
Okay. Also, I think it's worth noting that the full report includes all of those detailed responses from the different
Correct.
departments.
Yes.
Is that all available online?
It's all available online.
Okay, so people may want to check that out. It's a lot more information than this. And
Yes.
and this is
Correct.
available, of course, too.
Right.
Another question.
Okay, please.
On the options 1, 2, and 3, which option, I think in reading the full report, it was option 3, provided that the existing departments could still function with the build-out going on. Was that possible in option 3 or in any of the options presented? Do you remember?
I mean, at some point, all of the department, they'll have to stay, you have to still stay functioning as a government.
Right.
So whether or not they're functioning on the second floor or in I'll just say, use a trailer setup system outside.
Okay.
Every department will stay functioning
Right,
throughout the
right.
whole
But
project.
I just mean no additional relocation.
I think you
costs.
might mention that some departments could stay put, but just seeing what we went on at Alumni, what went on at the fire station, to think that we could really function in a construction zone, that's,
The cost goes up dramatically when you
Yeah.
try to phase, if you were to try to phase a project, as in do part of the building and then do another part.
Okay.
The cost goes up because
Right.
it's just.
So we-
that's one of those areas that
Right,
we
so
have to
regardless,
drill
there's
down
gonna
on.
be relocation costs
There would be, I
during the
think so, yeah.
project. Okay,
And we ran into that at Russell Street too, when we did the renovation. of
right,
Russell Street.
okay.
Good. We should go through the whole board first, Mark. Change anything?
Couple questions, comments. Option 2, we said that doesn't include the cost of acquiring the building. I presume that also doesn't include the opportunity cost of whatever tax that building would otherwise be paying?
That's correct.
Okay. A question that perhaps you guys could pass along to the architect. What I didn't see in the report is the basis for his estimated cost per square foot. He puts a table up there. I don't know where those come from. I would be interested in understanding where they come from in particular. Another question potentially for the architect, but maybe you guys can answer it. What I see here is an average dollar value per square foot for new construction. But each of these facilities would have unique and specific needs. Elder and Human Services are gonna have more accessibility-driven needs. The library is going to have technology needs, structural needs. Parks and Rec may have, needs for a certain space. I'm just confirming, we're just not at that level of refining those costs to this point, right?
Again, the 30,000 foot view of this.
We needed to be in the order of magnitude,
Right.
so then the next ones would actually be detailed design plans. We can't actually go out for a true design estimate without design plans, so to speak.
Absolutely.
And at that point, that's when you would nail down what departments need what kind of technology, things like that.
So would it be fair to say then, I mean, I'm looking at these costs, and if we add a couple $1 million to option 2, which is currently at $25 million and $20, our range would essentially go from 27 to $30 million. And given what we're looking at right now, are those meaningful distinctions in terms of dollar value, or are they essentially the same, or close enough to the same number that we couldn't really resolve the differences between them?
I mean, I think an order of magnitude of 10% at this point is probably a safe number. 27 million versus 30 million at this point, I don't think there's a difference in those two numbers.
That was my sense as well. I have one other question. Oh, Cindy covered it. So actually, any comments?
No.
Any good?
Yes.
Cindy good?
Yeah, fine.
Mark Ramacher,
Mark, I'm sorry, I have your questions, I'll be happy to read them.
Nope, I'm 205 Hartwell, and I'm a library trustee. I would hope that this is a starting point where the boards can get together and refine this process. But I'd also like to point out that on your option to rebuild, buy a new parcel and build 3 new buildings, you could do that here, right? The library's already planning to build off-site. Your cost for remodeling are almost the same as new construction. You could move the library, demolish the library, build a standalone building, and then demolish the rest and build a standalone building.
Just to give you an idea of the cost, so the old DPW garage, we have an estimate of $600,000 just to take down the garage. To take down this building, I'm gonna take a guess, 3 million?
Yeah, probably.
We have an estimate for the library because we had it as part of that was one of our options. We know
Yeah,
how much
there's-
it would have cost to rip down the library and rebuild there.
There's asbestos in this building, there's lead in this building, so there's all that type of remediation that has to happen. So I can't even begin to guess on how much it would take. to
But you're
take
gonna
down
have
this
all
building.
that
But yes,
same-
we could use this parcel and start fresh right here.
You're gonna have all those same costs for remodeling too, though, so it's not any different,
For remodeling, yes.
so.
Well, and that's a really important point, I think. When people look at a $12 million remodeling cost, that's not because everybody gets oak desks and, 10,000 square foot offices. That is driven most significantly by the fact that this building requires a lot of remodeling specialty work.
The one other point that I would like to make is on option 1, the cost to remodel the library in your estimate is 1.5 times the cost of new construction.
Actually, option 1 wasn't, that was
cost-
$10 million to renovate the existing library space to office space.
Yes, which is $625 a square foot. It's 16,000 square foot building.
Yeah, it's 10.1 versus 4.8, because the 4.8 figure is for option 2 and 3, and that's to renovate/build the 9,000.
No, it was just to build. 4.8 was to build a 10,000 square foot addition. To renovate, I don't know what's
Hold on a
existing.
second, sir. Any comments have to come through the chair? Can you just identify
Identify
yourself?
yourself.
I don't
Identify
really,
yourself. Hold on, hold on. Just identify yourself just for the record.
Chair, Stephen Cantino, 53 Washington Drive.
Thank you.
What's the square footage over there now?
16.5. But you had it as $10 million to renovate that, and the rest of the building is 34,000 square feet, roughly, and it's 12 million to renovate that, so the numbers don't line up, that's all. And in the options B and C, when you were doing the renovate and add-on, there wasn't a cost to renovate the existing structure for the library, separate, it was just an addition. So
Right.
the library still has all the asbestos and all the other issues. So I don't want to get into all the details here. I'm saying I'd like to hope that the boards can have representatives to go forward and come up with something more coherent and presentable for town meeting.
No, that's a good point, Mark, thank you.
No, that's,
Did you go?
no, Mark,
Covered it?
Okay.
Um,
And Mark, I'll be happy to sit down. I just didn't have time to write a response to you today, but be happy at any point.
All right, so I think that's Mr. Wilson.
Gary Wilson, 1 Wilson Lane. I'm just curious on option 3, it didn't mention what happens here. We're out of here, right? So everything.
Option four,
I'm sorry, everything's moved somewhere else. What happened? Now this place is just completely vacant at that point, correct?
So option 3 is a combination of
The addition?
going somewhere else.
No.
Option 3 is building an addition off the back.
Which one's the one where you're leaving here?
That's option
That's
3.
the alternate.
Everybody leaves?
Okay.
That's
So what happens, what I'm saying is, what do you do here? Are we gonna have to do?
Repurpose this building, we could
Lease it for something?
lease and sell it to somebody for assisted living, that they love grabbing old schools and doing something. We could mothball it in the event that the enrollment growth is gonna go up and we may need another school. There's decisions to be made with that.
Which is all part of, back to Mark's point, all of
The
us
cost
getting
that isn't
together.
shown, right.
Right.
Right, again, 30,000 foot.
Out on the Great 14 Coughlin Road. Is the phased slide that you put up, is that like an option 4, or is that a 3A, or?
It was kind of just a discussion point at this point, amongst the world champions of the selectmen on this project, Chris, myself, and Keith, and just kind of talking. It certainly could be an option, but we really would have to drill down more on that one too.
I think in the discussions, it was more of a throw the baby out with the bathwater and start again.
Okay.
There was no obvious answer that came out of the
Right.
study, that especially where all the options and finite options that we come up with each seem to be costing about the same.
Right.
And that came in, and cumulatively came in at a pretty high price tag.
You know, what prompted my question was, on the slide, going from right to left, was building a new library, then building the office buildings, and then multi-generational, which puts you under your
In no-
primary
in no
focus
particular
was
order.
COA,
Right.
and
In no
became
particular
last.
No particular
Well, if you read, you could read from left to right now.
That's not what the explanation was, so.
Yeah.
In no
Just don't
particular
lose
order.
No, that was in no particular order.
Park and Rec and COA were your primary focus, don't make them last in this deal, so.
Right.
No,
No, that
but
was,
point taken. That was not, there was no intention there. It was just, I think it was just to draw people's eyes across the
that's all.
slide.
You're right, that's all it was. But Al, another thing with that, you know, that's interesting in that, the alternate approach is that everybody kind of stays put, so you don't have that relocation cost associated with that. Yes, there'd be some kind of land acquisition cost, but, you know, how much would relocation cost be, and is it almost offset, you know, so. And then we'd end up with energy efficient buildings. We probably would save a significant amount of money on utilities by going into new construction as opposed to a building that was built, I don't know when this was built, 19.
There's 3 different phases.
3 different phases, all right, so.
Different time frames.
And if I may, I mean, if we wanted to take a very long-term view of this, if what we're looking at is the needs over the next 20 years, but we're building buildings that are supposed to be 50 or 100-year buildings, if we're gonna look at this in its totality, the expandability of these buildings over the long term, if we could acquire that for a reasonable cost, would not be a poor consideration. And that to me is what is another interesting component of the alternative approach, in that we could construct these buildings with expansion 20 or 30 years down the line in mind today, spacing wise, construction wise, so on. And I think we shouldn't lose track of that particular point.
Right, and if I may, in the report, he does provide for future space needs. I just don't know how far out it was projected, but I remember reading that.
20 years.
20 years,
is-
20, okay.
Good, Anthony. Scruth?
Katie Cruz, Goldsmith Street. I just wanted to mention that in speaking to the MBLC, I learned that there are other ways that towns are dealing with building libraries after they've received this grant, or they know that it's coming. 3 in front of us in line have decided to go ahead and build a library before they're awarded the money, because they know it's coming and because they can save a lot of money by building maybe 3 years earlier.
Inflation costs, whatnot, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Amy Charler-Lewis at Omega Way. So I just had sort of a couple of comments. So just to kind of tag on to Mark's point, I actually feel like the study wasn't particularly well done. I kind of had trouble following some of the numbers and tying them back. Just as maybe just a learning lesson, it might be better to pay a little bit more money and get better information. I think the study kind of provides a general roadmap, again, the 30,000 foot, but I think we would need real designs and real costs to be able to really move forward with decisions and to go to town meeting. The other thing I think it does, it really affirms the library's needs and other people's needs. I think it just sort of reiterates what a lot of people are sort of saying. And I think I'm really sort of becoming a little bit interested in sort of an option 3 where we buy land and we move. I think there's a lot of efficiencies of building a new building. I think there are inefficiencies that you just naturally end up with by sort of staying here. I think if we, and I know this is like a really scary number, but I think, you know, really we're looking at a $30 to $35 million override, I think realistically, and I think it's a little bit like peeling off the Band-Aid super quick, but I think it really addresses a lot of needs that are true, that are urgent. I think the bigger the number, the lower the interest rate, so I think that's a saving. So I think we'll save on building now, I think we'll save on a better interest rate. And I haven't really paid too much of attention to this, but I know Kimball's is sort of like back into the planning board zoning piece. If we move there, we could tie into their septic system. And I think that would solve kind of some of the septic issues that you would have by moving a lot of people and a lot of facilities somewhere. So I'm really kind of becoming a little bit more interested in that as I sort of think about it and process. I think I need a lot more information, but I feel like I'm kind of tracking that lane, so.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks.
No, you hit it right in the head. Once again, this is so quick. With all the points you pointed out, it was the same thing that I went through when I went through this. It was so confusing, and maybe it wasn't done that well. I know that when I met Mr. Lieb in late spring, early fall, early summer, he had told me he'd have all this information to us by the end of summer, and we could talk about it in September. And now we're in January, so I mean, I was disappointed with this and that, but thank God we have something to look at, so we know what the space needs are, at least we think we need the space. But you brought up a lot of good points.
Erica had her hand up before you, sorry.
Erica Pug, Morning Fox Lane. One concern I had was we've gotten the grant for the library, and so we know that we can move ahead with that. Everything else is so preliminary at this point, and it assumes that we can just go and get that grant again, and I don't think that's an assumption that we can necessarily make.
I think you're right, and I think that there are, somebody mentioned opportunity costs earlier, I think Chase, you brought up opportunity costs earlier. Some of the points Amy made, some of the points that we looked at when we were trying to put this alternative approach together was just that. Well, if we don't get reimbursement, if we're not in line, and we have to forego the grant, and we build everything on one campus, there's some opportunity costs that we will realize, and there's some opportunity costs that we'll lose. So we have to kind of make that decision, and I think that we can, as a town, without the limitations of the commissioners, I think we can ultimately get a better library if we were able to fund it outside of getting the grant, but $5 million as a gift is, it's tough to say no to that and realize that. Actually, I had two before you, so Jenna, I think you were next to the show.
Jenna Brownson, Harvard Road, also the chair of the library trustees. I just wanted to mention that the $5.8 million grant that was awarded to our town in July is for the project that took years to put together and is specific to what we felt as a board was the best choice by factoring in folks' input in town as to what they preferred, and also by way of cost. It was estimated that the cost to build new would be less than to remodel. And for some of the things that you pointed out, and what Chase mentioned as well, is that, you know, asbestos and lead jack the price up. I saw on your alternative phased-in approach, you have in there a calculation of 4-point-something million as a grant amount at 45%. That would need to be on a brand-new grant cycle, which is 6 or 7 years out. So there's no way to bank on a couple of things.
Right.
That we would be getting that $4 point whatever million sometime soon, or even necessarily down the road. There's a lot of doom and gloom around, will this money still be there? And I don't know, without my crystal ball, if we don't take this $5.8 million, if there'll ever be money again, with the way life has turned in the last little while. So, and, you know, and certainly I'm not someone who operates on a fear-based mentality. I just don't want to miss an opportunity on an assumption that, oh, we can get 4-point-something million if we do the phased-in approach.
Right, well, we don't even know if the legislature will authorize the money that we're on the waiting list for too.
Right.
It's just, we just don't know a lot of things.
Right.
You know, and we have to go off of something.
Yeah.
You know, and I think if the library was to be here and the rest of the town's needs needed to be addressed and a parcel, we got a parcel and the library was built, it would be something to consider that the library could be in the back of an abandoned building and everything else be downtown too. So I think looking at it as a holistic approach makes sense for everybody, even for the success on the use of the library too.
You know, my only concern is being, you know, the advocate for the library is that many, many years and countless hours, even with members of your own board, have gone into coming up with what we really believed was the best location to serve as a community center for our town. So, and I believe in democracy, so if it turns out it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. However, it's $5.8 million, it's a lot of dollars.
Thank you. I do see you.
Stephen Cantino, 53 Washington Drive. Speaking of turn this time, sorry. My question for 2 and 3, that involves lands, or I think the phased in 3. Are there any prospective pieces of land that you're looking at within town yet, or
We really can't.
nothing yet?
I mean, there's pieces of land that we have in town, but it would be.
For us to show our hands could jeopardize anything, so it doesn't make sense to really discuss anything at this point.
Gotcha. Now, would it be unreasonable that at the town meeting, when this has more detail, that those options would be on the table at that point? Or no?
It would depend on, that if there were land out there that we were interested in, it may not be available at town meeting.
Yeah.
I mean, there's, you know, with.
I think all this did tell us is that we have a lot of work to do.
I do see it, but Judy, you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, good.
Okay, I'm Judy Graney from Oak Ridge Road. Just one thing about option 1 that I wanted to point out, a couple of things. One is that $6 or $12 million, the matching, whatever we're getting, the $6 million, say, for a number.
Yeah.
If you take that out of the $30 million that you're talking about for renovating the building, the cost to the town would only be $24 million maximum, because we'd be getting the $6 million.
Wasn't that at all?
And that would cover the cost of the library.
Judy, so the 30 million actually accounts for that 6 million. Option 1 is actually a $36 million cost,
Oh, okay.
less 6 million to get to the $30 million to the
The other thing I wanted to mention was just in terms of logistics. If we build this library here, we don't have to close down the library. If we don't, if we decide to renovate this building, we're gonna have to close down the library for, I don't know how long. Because the floors have to be reinforced, the elevator has to be put in, everything has to be done with the asbestos and all that. And when we were looking at options about building or renovating, that was a huge factor, was the fact that the library, the new library can be built while the old library is still functioning. And then we don't have to schlep stuff all around town, it's just right across the parking lot.
And I think that's why we thought about the alternative plan, because that did the same thing, but it met the needs of everybody in town.
Yeah, definitely factored in. Those are great points.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
All right, Jean, you were next.
Hi, Jean Sill, 53 Washington Drive. As a librarian in our town and as seeing who uses our town daily, I would be appalled to have the library leave this position. If we went somewhere over by Kimball's, kids do not walk over here on half-day Wednesdays if they're over there. Our schools are here, they're permanent. Our library should be near the schools, so they can be used.
Thanks. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to take notes at the same time. Go ahead, no, Katie, you're up.
Oh, okay. And I had a thought about option one. I think that a real significant cost was not included in that calculation, and I know that the calculations are just really not really usable, but the cost, I don't see included in that the cost of repurposing or rebuilding the existing library site to be used as a library, because it would need significant alterations to, support the weight, to meet the requirements, the building requirements of a library, and I didn't see that added into option one, and I thought that was like around $6 million in the plans.
It's option 3.
No.
So you're talking about if we were to renovate the library to be used as a library?
Yeah.
That's not option one.
Yeah, it's not.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm
That's
sorry.
fine, we got the picture, we got you.
But each time, they always talk about it in terms of just putting on an addition, and that's that's less than half the work.
So all of the consideration and all the work that went into the planning for the library was all information that Mr. Lee used. He's an architect, and he licenses and uses engineers and everything as part of his consultation. There's certainly holes in the work that we got, in my opinion, but I don't question his integrity as to whether or not he would, I don't think he's gonna put us into a building that's unsafe or not to code. I mean, all the numbers that he gave us took all of that into account, I believe.
It didn't look like they did to me, and I don't think it's about integrity.
I think based on the fact that we have a single dollar per square foot for the entire facility, we're still at that higher level where we're not looking at the individual needs of individual users.
So I will say that there was definitely consideration, just using the structure, as to whether or not it was it was built to be able to be a library. He had plans for, and you can't really see it on the drawings, but he had plans for moving the lion's share, if you will, of the books to other, either lower levels, that the ground level, for instance, that can support the weight, or to an addition that would be built. That was all part of the consideration. Am I touching on it?
Yeah, that explains a lot. So it wouldn't have been brought up to like library code, or the.
It wasn't built, the library code wasn't in place when this building was built.
The additions would be built up to current code. So if the additions needed 150 pounds per square foot, they would be built to
Right.
handle the weight in the additions.
Are we just are we close, but we're just driving by each other?
I'm understanding,
Oh.
that explains it.
All right, thanks. Sarah?
Sarah Rambacher, Hartwell Avenue. I think, building off of what Jean said and some other things, I think that this report, and everyone's focusing a lot on the numbers and the cost per square foot and the square footage and all that, and we do need to remember there are a lot of other considerations like proximity to the schools and the proximity to other services, and things like, well, if you put all the books on the ground floor, does that mean the meeting rooms are on the third floor? So to go to a meeting room, we have to go up to the third floor. There are just a lot of soft things that we also have to keep in mind besides the numbers.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that some of the considerations with the alternative site was not necessarily the distance for the kids walking to the schools, from the schools to the library, but the kids, I know my son walks up to Subway or Donlands, and if Park and Rec or a multi-generational facility were also on that campus, that has some draw to it as well. So, I mean, there's a number of these finer details that we tried to take a lot of this into consideration. We tried to play devil's advocate, but the devil's the details, and we could be 20 years from today looking back and either have the slope site with other things that happened in order to renovate the town offices. We're always gonna look back and say, we should have done this, and it's the nature of, every one of us has done any kind of a project at our homes. We can always say, oh, I should have put the little toaster butler or whatever it's called on the countertop. But all this input is important and it's good. And this is, again, this is a 30,000-foot view. It's not, in my opinion, I think we kind of got what we paid for. We put it out there the first time for $20,000 and we didn't get anybody. We put it out again for $50,000 thinking that we would get a decent product. We got a product. It's helped us to further the conversation. I don't think it's answered all of our questions, but it has helped us to get to the next point. And, you know, going back to what Mark said before, I believe, if we jump off of this and start having those more detailed conversations and you know, try to further identify the needs at a different level, I think it'll be important to make sure that everybody's included. All right. Anybody else before I move on to the next topic? Sure, Katie.
Just a little anecdote about putting books in the basement. When I was talking when Sam and I went to get feedback on the design, they told us that they use Littleton as an example of why you don't put books in the basement. Because people forget they're there and they don't know they're there. And we saw that happen during the teddy bear sleepover. People went in the basement and they're like, they had no idea we had all those cookbooks down there. True story.
Need bigger signs. All right.
This
Mr.
one,
Wilson, this
one
is it.
that, it will be Gary Wilson on Wilson Lane, just thinking, we keep talking the 30,000-foot view, well, this needs to get focused in pretty quick, because there's $5.8 million, potentially could become really quick, so I don't know how we go about getting all of this put together when all the work that the library's done and the trustees push this whole thing forward is coming to a head here, right? Probably this summer, you know, so this is a lot of work, and we're, like you said, we're way up here, so getting this down, there's gonna have to be a lot of discussions in a pretty short amount of time. So just.
He's last.
I just want to make a
I
little suggestion.
was gonna bring you into this, just to Mr. Wilson's point. I was gonna say, I got my tour coming up. We're not sure, hopefully Wednesday. Maybe we can start having this conversation around getting together with the trustees and is that what you were gonna
You
say?
said you have your tour. I'm like, you're going on tour? That's so exciting. What are you doing? No, what I was going to say is, Katie had mentioned that there are 3 communities on the wait list who've already started building or funding or whatever. You know, if it's palatable, we certainly could bring a request for $13.1 million minus the funds raised thus far to Maytown meeting. If that's something that the community would like, we could certainly speed things up and save us potentially millions of dollars in accelerated costs for interest and construction.
Certainly a possibility, and we'd have to get a new one of these.
Until you're actually offered the grant, though, I wouldn't want to, I mean, if the purpose of having town meeting vote is to accelerate the construction schedule or something, I mean, we really need to wait for the state to reach us on that.
We would have to do a debt exclusion.
Otherwise, we exclude $13 million of debt instead of the difference in order to proceed. And then turn back the grant if we start before we get the grant.
No, we would still get the grant. All those communities started building, they know the money's coming. They know the ultimate cost, so temporarily they're borrowing. No, they know it's coming, they've been awarded the money.
That's the same thing with the sewer that we're talking about earlier, is that we could be on the hook for the sewer. That means we could equally be on the hook for the library. If the state all of a sudden started tanking and the legislature said, sorry, no more money, then the town of Littleton's on the hook for the entire project.
So not, Mr. Chair, just to, so you're saying that we're number 5 on the waiting list, and that communities that are 1, 2, 3, and 4 on the waiting list have proceeded, are proceeding with their projects, not waiting for a grant agreement from the state?
Yes.
You know, more power to them.
Yeah.
I mean, if nothing else, that might mean that we're higher up on the waiting list, because I don't think they're gonna see that grant money.
Actually, I'm not sure if they're above us or below us. Now that you mention it, I can find out and get back
Yeah,
to you.
I would hope they're below, for their sake. So.
Change the question.
Primarily for the board, a question about the feasibility of putting a group together with the most significant users that would be addressed by this, to perhaps go through this report in a bit more detail as it's specific to the needs of this COA, the needs of Parks and Rec, the needs of the library, the needs of the administration, PMBC, maybe a selectman, and really start to hone in on places that we might want to ask the architect additional questions, get additional clarification, and then we have representatives from each of the major stakeholders.
So it was my intention, since this was Joe and my goal, for us to reconvene and kind of start down that exact road, so I appreciate that input. You're not done yet, Mr. Knox. More meetings with me. All right, I think we're okay to wrap this up. We good? Cindy, you?
I'm good.
Cheers. Joe? All right.
Anthony said it was on the website, so I just kept his word. I uploaded it.
Thank you, everybody, for your input, and I'll confirm with you on Saturday.
Just let me know. Yeah, thanks.
All right. Chris, thank you. So you're just gonna go home and turn around and come back?
Thank you very much, Anthony and Chris. Make sure we're salted. Very good.
Is it supposed to snow?
It's icy.
Oh, no, I didn't.
They were treating earlier. Big truck drove by, so we'll make sure that.
I'm not excited to see you on here with the snow and
I
ice.
just think it's a done deal. And there's not even a big crowd here from Cricket Lane. We withered them down.
You're right, where are they?
I do appreciate you all coming out tonight, but I do appreciate you leaving the room as well.
You don't have to go home, but
Just don't have to stay here.
can't say.
Thank you, Liz. All right, so next up on our agenda is the Cricket Lane parcel, item 6 on our agenda, and it's a discussion amongst the board as to what our action is going to be, whether we take action this evening.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
due to circumstances that come up in the last 2 weeks, I have to recuse myself of conflict of interest, so
I appreciate you
I'll step outside.
making us aware. Do you have to step outside?
That's advised. You usually leave the room.
You want to
You
bring
don't
your,
have to go outside.
you want to bring your new book with you so you can read something?
You can stay inside in the hall.
A couple times?
You don't have to stand in the rain.
You can go get us some coffees, Joe. All right, so we've had a number of discussions, and we've had a lot of input, some great input, and some of the, we've gone back and forth and tried to listen to what the abutters have, not even just abutters, just different folks have given us input on what they would like to see happen with this land, and we've debated as to what we feel we should do and what our responsibilities are. And so we're faced with basically a couple of different choices tonight. And just like to kind of open up the conversation if anybody wants to get us started, or if you want me to go through a bit of a summary and get us started.
I think since the last item that was on the table before we broke last week was the whole concept of the HCA, that some members were promoting at that time, and there's been a significant amount of fall-through on that. You probably, I would suggest you might want to update the people as to where that all stands.
So we did have a, thank you, Paul. Chase and I worked with Keith and, is Anthony on this?
Yeah,
Anthony.
And town council.
And town council, and,
Anthony's on everything.
yeah, pretty much. You go home? And, but we got together and we kind of determined that it would be worthwhile to look at doing a host community agreement with the developer. And Steve and Roger Kennard were gracious enough to work with us, and we went back and forth with town council and with their council, and came up with what we feel is a good agreement, a good contract, if you will, which would allow them or require them to build a development under the new senior development bylaw. Sorry, I'm probably murdering
I've got
what it's
the,
called.
Here are the 4 paragraphs that are,
So there are the 4 paragraphs, and probably
that are the main
better
part
that
of
you
the
read them than I paraphrase them. But it would ensure to the town that we would get a residential development with only cottage-style dwellings pursuant to the Chapter 173, Article 23 of the zoning bylaws. The developer would agree to give to the town a minimum of 30% of Cricket Lane property as the bylaw states. So it would then put the development in the hands of the planning board. So the developer would then go to the planning board and kind of work through the details of the development and determine number of units, where they wanted buffers or open space or that kind of thing. So we did go through what we would like to see, but felt as though the planning board, being the regulatory board for these matters, that we would kind of leave that responsibility in their hands. So this is the 4 paragraphs of the host community agreement, which
There's boilerplate before and after, but these are the operative provisions.
there's a lot of whereases that the attorneys get paid extra money for adding in before and after this, but this is, the meat and potatoes of what we would get, what they would get, and what they would be required to do. So if we were, and we can have the discussion as to whether or not this is the best course of action. I feel strongly that this is the best thing for us to do, for a number of reasons. I think it number one, financially, it doesn't put $1 million burden on us. $1 million to buy a piece of land that we don't know what we would do with after purchasing it. And regardless of what we would do with it, whether we'd hold on to it, it's a $1 million investment in a beautiful piece of land. I'm sure that many of the neighbors would be very happy with that. That would be $1 million that we wouldn't be able to spend on something else. And there's a lot, as people have seen after the budget presentation, the space needs study, there's a lot of things that are pulling at our purse strings. The ladder truck, there's 6-wheel dump trucks. I'm on a roll, let me go. But the other thing is it allows us to implement a bylaw that we just put into play just at fall town meeting. And this, I think, shows a great effort on the part of the planning board, the part of the Board of Selectmen, and certainly the developer stepping forward and being willing to do this type of development, which would help seniors that are looking to continue to live in Littleton. And I'll let you jump in.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ed Mullen, Planning Board Chair, Congress Mill Road, President. Couple things. It also puts in the inclusionary zoning bylaw, which then dedicates money to the Senior Affordable Housing Trust Fund. So that alone, by moving this piece of property into the senior residential development, creates money for the Senior Affordable Housing Trust Fund right off the bat. On top of that, it's also meeting the goals of the master plan, to create housing, diverse housing in our town and for seniors as part of the master plan. So I think it's great. I also wanted to thank the two of you for including the planning board in the initial discussions, although we wanted to step out once you said you were working on this. It's the first time we were contacted by the select board for a host community agreement to see what was going to happen, and want to let you know we're grateful for the opportunity that you left it to us and had faith in us to make the decisions moving forward. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any comments?
So I see some pros and cons with this. The pro is unambiguously that the town has a need for senior residential development that is of a price that people can afford. My biggest concern is that, and I think this can be mitigated, but my biggest concern is that as it's structured right now, something drastically different than even what the abutters saw a couple weeks ago could be put forward. And so it's incumbent, in my opinion, it's incumbent upon both the developer and the planning board to engage in discussions in a very, very open manner from the outset, if this is going to be something that's going to gain the approval of the abutters. And frankly, the senior residential zoning bylaw gives the abutters a great deal of say in the process. What I would not want to see is, Mr. Kennard, go out, put together your plan, and show up at the planning board with, here's what we want to do, without that dialogue and consultation. Because I think that could put both your prospective work, the town, and the abutters all in a bad position. And my concern is that because we elected to leave essentially all of this to the planning board, what we didn't do is put bounds on it that the abutters may want to discuss and conceive of. And so if there is that willingness to engage in that discussion from the beginning, then I see this HCA as being more good than bad and could probably support it. But I'm not in love with it because of the absence of those bounds.
Through the chair.
Please.
I think you're absolutely right, and I would encourage at this meeting and also our meetings to have the abutters attend our meetings, and, you know, please share your thoughts with us, reach out to us, you know, email the administrators, they'll get it to us. Marin's great at, I mean, I probably get 50 emails a day. Don't tell my boss at work that I'm reading them. But, so yeah.
You just did.
They don't watch it, Concord.
Oh, they don't?
So,
We're online.
So yeah, please encourage everybody, all the abutters, anybody interested in this. This is our first one, folks. We want to hit a home run with it. And, you know, I think the Kennard's reputation speaks for itself, and it'll be my first project with them as a planning board member. So all the good things I've heard, I hope they come to fruition.
Thanks.
And I would also encourage you, I think you were at least 2 of the last 3 meetings that we've had, or 1 of the last 3 meetings. Definitely go back and get some of the feedback that we were given that, say, I was more interested in trying to incorporate into this HCA that we ultimately elected not to do, because there are not a lot of abutters here now. And one of my concerns is that I want to make sure that they understand that we heard them, and what we're saying is that they need to continue to be heard by engaging planning board. This is not this HCA is not a disregard of their concerns. It's simply putting it in a forum in which you're better positioned to specifically address their concerns on a timeline that's much more reasonable than the host community agreement timeline or I'm sorry, the 61A timeline.
Do you have comments?
I do. I just wanted to ask Mr. Mullen a question. You do, under the bylaw, the developer has the option to pay into the Senior Affordable Housing Trust or provide a percentage of affordable units, right?
19 units or less than 20, so we look at it as a 19-unit number.
Okay.
They've already proposed to do more than that, so they can't pay in lieu of unless they want to reduce down, but they have to provide an affordable
Right,
component.
okay. I just,
So-
yeah, exactly. I just wanted to clarify that. And the other, I just wanted to build on what Chase just said. Certainly, there was so much input put into this process to get us to this meeting, and we certainly did hear the abutters and took into strong consideration their concerns. Really, my decision is, you know, as a member of the Board of Selectmen, our fiduciary responsibility to be responsible. And you know, echoing what Mr. DeCoste said, the chairman said, there's a lot of other things on the table right now before the town. And, you know, $1 million on a parcel of land could be a good investment. But we have to just look at the broader picture, I think. I think that's part of our responsibility, sitting on this board, so. But I'm glad that we got to this point, and I'm glad that the planning board has been involved, and it's been a good discussion, I feel.
I do as well.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I just wouldn't mind the opportunity to make 4 hopefully brief points. First is that my original and consistent reason for supporting an exercise of the town's right of first refusal has been based on expressed need, demonstrated need for athletic fields in town, and my personal belief that the best, that's a benefit that can be spread around the town, should be spread around the town. That being said, I'm very mindful that we actually heard folks objecting to that in their neighborhood, and I took note of that, but I was also struck by a hopeful tone between both the proponents for athletic fields. I think it was primarily the soccer folks and some of the neighbors, and I held out the hope that a working, a willingness to work together between those two parties would make that a good reason to pursue purchasing it. I have no doubt that in the not-too-distant future, we will be paying $1 million for a piece of land that will be used for athletic fields. So if that's a milestone that we're not crossing today, we're going to cross it at some point. So that's not, I don't think that's a big deal for me. Nonetheless, it takes 3 votes for us to exercise that. There are no longer 3 votes for going forward, so I'm not going to belabor the point. And instead, I will reiterate something I said at the last meeting, and that's that this situation actually presents us with 2 possible good outcomes, and I think that the option that you folks have put your time into working on, and as well as the planning board and the proponent developers, Kennards, presents us with a chance to exercise a long-stated objective of the town, and that's, gee, wouldn't it be nice to have a housing development where the developers worked with the planning board on something that served needs defined by the town and not by the state. Here we've got it, as Ed pointed out, this is just adopted. This is the first opportunity for the town to put to the test the senior bylaw that was adopted last year by the townspeople, and I have every faith that Roger Kennard and Steve Kennard are exactly the sort of people the town will want to be doing business with to make sure that comes out right. So I have no problem with where where this discussion is going to lead to, and I am pretty certain that it'll probably all work out well after it goes through the planning board process. I want to note 2 other things briefly. One is on the whole topic of 61As. If you bring a project forward, when your property's under 61A, you're inviting the town to kick the tires and come up with whatever ideas they might have, and that's how the process works. If you don't want that process, then take your property out of 61A before you come forward with a proposal. But that's more of a object lesson for other folks than a relevant point in this discussion. Finally, we had a lot of people at a number of different meetings. It was like at least our 4th meeting on this topic, and the other 3, I think we had much bigger crowds, but perhaps folks are satisfied they had a chance to speak their piece. And I'd say that they were the neighbors and folks that showed up with interest were thoughtful, they were respectful, and they were willing to consider various options and new ideas, and all that left me feeling good about what is often a contentious process dealing with prospective land development. So with that, I'm ready to move forward whenever somebody here is ready to make a motion.
Thank you, Paul. Appreciate it.
Would you mind if I followed
Not at all.
his comments with two points? Keith, would you mind to put up the language of the 4 relevant clauses of the article? There are 2 components here that were significant considerations that touch on what Paul was saying in the ability or need for fields, as well as the desire, as expressed through the master plan, to maintain our sort of agricultural space. And those are twofold. One is the minimum 30%. Now, the developer is committed under the senior residential zoning bylaw to 30%. I would hope that we could find a way to benefit his project and increase that amount. And the other piece, because there are potential uses for that, for passive recreation, active recreation, or even agricultural uses, that I think, depending on what the planning board finds, could fit into the community, address abutters' needs, as well as address the future residents. The other important component here that we put in is component, or clause 3, that essentially says the topsoil is not going to be stripped. The the parcel that will ultimately be conveyed to the town will be accepting drainage and utility components, essentially usable for something that the town and the abutting residents could benefit from. And that's not determined, that the intent of this was not to make a determination on that. But, you know, we could be looking at 4 acres, 3.6 is the minimum. You know, you can do a lot with that, both in recreational, agricultural, or passive recreational purposes.
Thank you. All right. Amy, go ahead.
Amy at Career Megaway. So I just had one request, and I don't know if it's too late to put this in, but I personally would really love to see some land put aside for farmland for active agriculture. I don't know if 5 acres might be a possible discussion point or not. I also just sort of had a couple of requests. So I don't know, just for future thinking, if the town would consider setting up some sort of land trust. I know we sort of find ourselves in these reactive positions with the 61As, and I'd really like to see the town really kind of get ahead of it and perhaps set up a land trust for the future. And I would also ask the planning board to really uphold the bylaws of sort of the more aesthetics of the homes, to sort of try to exceed them and not have them look like Stalinistic concrete blocks. I actually live on the opposite side of town, so this really doesn't affect me very much. I actually never really drive by. I don't even think I've ever driven by this piece of land yet. But, and I would like to see, just in terms of upholding the spirit of supporting the seniors, that we really have low to moderate income housing. I really don't feel like a $500,000 house for a senior is really affordable housing or really senior housing. I mean, I have a family of 4 and my house was more than $500,000. I wouldn't move into another $500,000 house. I'd definitely downsize. So I'd really like to see the spirit of that really serving the people who are really truly the intent was for. Because I did vote for it, but I had a lot of concerns that there wasn't like an age restriction on it. That really kind of didn't settle with me so well. So I'm putting my trust and faith that you guys will maintain the spirit.
I'll tell you, at the MMA conference, Keith and I were in a zoning seminar, and some of the cottage-style developments that were put in place exceeded even what I would say were my wildest dreams of what was possible. There is the potential there to do something.
Riverwalk in West Concord, for example.
I was a contractor on that project.
Was it Abe Lincoln that said, it's better to sit silent and thought of dope than
Well, I think
open your
if
mouth
we
and
wanna
relieve?
do that, I think we know what we're not strong with, so.
Rob Hart, 7 Barron Way, one of the abutters. We are also opposed to Stalinistic housing of any kind.
In case that was
Duly noted.
Please, put that in the record. I have to admit, there's part of this that I really like. I like where the process is going, in that we're getting greater and greater clarity. What would development look like? Because as you recall at the start of this, you know, playing fields, we didn't know what that was. That was going to be some huge Disney World or something, and development was going to be who knew what. So where this is going is we're getting more and more precise about what's possible here. And I like that. But I also have to admit some disappointment, because the issue, as others have expressed here, of preservation, open space and agriculture, always seems to go down. It's important. And I think I'm really proud of our neighbors for coming forth and making the case, which you agreed with, 4 to 0. Said, yes, that matters. And so the intention is always there. I never doubt it. It's the execution where we trip up. And one of the points I've been trying to make, and I guess unsuccessfully, but I've tried one last shot on this, is saying, I think there's a possibility. I appreciate your fiduciary responsibility, looking at the fire trucks and the libraries and everything else that's on your plate. I respect that and understand that. It just feels to me like we're going about this in a wrong way. Because preservation and agriculture are always going to end up at the bottom. Something we want to do, but we just can't afford it. The thing is, and I think the gentleman from the master plan made this point, said we're no longer that town, farmers and shopkeepers that just kind of go around. If you've ever been, when you go down to the train station, who's going into Boston? Who's riding those trains in the morning? Or out on Route 2? These are software engineers and consultants and attorneys and middle managers and executives. This town has a lot more wealth than it's ever had in its history. We also have, so we have individuals who have some wealth. We also have small business all the way up to multinationals in this town that are part of our community. To what degree, this lady has mentioned, starting a trust saying, so how much have we focused on going out and talk to those individuals and say, look, this is the community that you moved into. You're part of us now. And let's have that conversation. And I think we'd be surprised that we can start preserving. I wanted Cricket Lane, I still want it to be first point, first project where we start to find new sources of funding that allows us to live up to those values of preservation. So I want to make that point. I think there's still a possibility of doing that here.
I have some comments as well, but go ahead.
Okay, on that point, I'm in complete harmony with you, Mr. Hartz, on the objectives, but I think it's worth noting two things. One, at least two things. One is that historically, before we were as wealthy a community as we are now, we actually did have a plan and a savings plan, and this predated the Community Preservation Act. We just did it on our own, saved money, and we did 5 purchases in a row. Some required additional funding through overrides, and there was a lot of state programs involved. But the green belt that starts with the Wickham Frost property continues to the Morgan property, the Prouty property, Hartwell property, and whoever I'm leaving out. No, in the Morrison, the Orchard, those are all proactive efforts on the town's part. We did that, and we did that when we had less wealth in town, but we did it by just salting money away. We haven't prohibited ourselves from accessing some of those funds that we've designated toward capital purchases for that end. So maybe, a discussion on that subject in-house is appropriate. As far as the trust, as far as a land trust goes, it made great efforts years ago because that's a private entity. It would be independent of the town. But I brought in folks from 2 very different but very successful land trusts in our area, one being the Lincoln Land Trust, which owns commercial property and uses that as a revenue generator, and the other one being the Harvard Land Trust, which uses wealthy individuals as kind of a bank to fund it. And our conservation trust consistently had no interest in getting into the financial end. Advocacy, sure, but not raising the money. So I think we need to relook at that. If our existing trust, which has a lot of value to it, won't go in that direction, we need to start a separate trust that has as its motivating factor not just advocating environmental protection, but financing it. And that can be done, and I'd be happy to work with you on that.
Thanks, Paul. You touched on a lot of the comments that I said. And one of the things that you didn't touch on, but this particular bylaw factors in 30% of any project as open space. So we didn't throw it away. We were very cognizant of it. To Chase's point, he was looking for more.
Right. No, I appreciate, again, I think that, I really like that the process was inclusive in that way. I just think that there's more that we can do, because I think we lose one last time, we will lose this possibly, we lose the next and the one after. And I think it's time that we have to stop and say, let's just really look at this. And my last point is really just a bit of personal reflection on the process, if I may, which is, first of all, I admire all of you for really staying with it. You really did a great job of listening and listening to multiple points of view. I came in as an advocate, as you know, for preservation. I still am. I'm not changing that, or agriculture as well. One thing that I did that was I said, I'm going to try something I'm supposed to be doing all the time, which is listen. Really pay attention. And what I noticed in this process, something changed. What changed is it started with, 20 or so near neighbors really pushing for preservation, and ultimately we came to different conclusions about what's suitable if preservation is not a possibility. You witnessed all that. What happened in the last meeting, though, was it was no longer a small neighborhood figuring out a small plot of land. The town showed up. The people who are looking for playing fields, those adults that are looking for some playing fields for their children. And it reminded me of, like, as I goes to Christmas past, oh, that was me, with our 3 kids. My wife and I brought 3 kids from a different town 22 years ago. And like any parent, we're really worried, will our kids fit in? Is this going to work out? It reminded every one of them did very quickly because they joined teams. They made instant friends. And that was fabulous. And I really began to appreciate that point that was made about playing fields. But then I started thinking about, well, if I'm for preservation and playing fields, I'm going to knock something aside. Maybe the senior housing stuff. And anyway, that's probably for, like, I talked about my 96-year-old mother or something like that. Then the unfortunate thing is I caught the image of my own image in the glass. Oh, I might be closer to the mark than I thought. So it made me think, yeah, seniors need their place too. And I'm making this point not to sound wishy-washy at all. What I think happened for me, and I hope for others, is saying each one of these points is valid, important, necessary. Preservation still matters to this town. You take a field that's been around for 300 years and take an eraser to it, that's no small thing. Because it doesn't just affect, 3 dozen neighbors. It's this generation, the next generation, and every generation that comes afterwards, time immemorial. It's a big deal when a small town lets that land go. Second is the playing fields are obviously needed and necessary, and we do need to work on senior housing. For those reasons, this is much bigger than the small neighborhood. This is a town issue. I would appeal to you to take it to the town to make the decision by using your right of first refusal.
Thank you. Want to comment?
Yeah, I just, Mr. Glavy mentioned a land acquisition fund. The town did have one that was funded prior to my arrival. The account still exists, there's nothing in it, but the account still exists. So I would suggest that maybe through the Financial Policies Review Committee, we can address maybe funding that as part
Yeah,
of it.
I didn't have anything
just-
specific in
You don't
mind.
happen to have $1 million squirreled away.
No.
But also in some of our other capital accounts, we don't really have that defined down to, what it can and can't be used for either. I mean, when we end up putting aside money for open space, it appears on the same capital request list with,
Correct. But if
fire
it's-
trucks and buildings.
Yes, but if it's put in, or if there's an appropriation that's defined by financial policies,
Yeah.
a percentage of the
Yeah,
capital
I'm-
plan or something, then it can only be used for open space.
Right.
So, just a thought.
Yep.
Mr. Chair,
Thank you.
I just want to make one quick comment. I fully agree that more needs to be done, certainly to preserve open space. It's something that's obviously very near and dear to our community. I know through the CPA funds, the CPC, a majority of that money has been spent on open space. I believe it's close to $2 million since we began utilizing that program to preserve open space, and less than 6% of those funds have been used for housing. So that's just something to really, most people don't realize that, but just something to take, just to keep in the back of your mind. I think that the town has done the best they can do with what we have, but we can do better. And I think we're at a breaking point right now with development that we need to figure out a way that we can do better. So, that's it.
Thank you. Mr. Hartz, thank you, because sitting here, I was going through a lot of the same emotions that you mentioned, and whether it was my mom and my stepdad fell and broke his neck a couple of years ago, and he's had a tough time, and he went from playing golf twice a week to barely getting around with a walker. So when I look at something like what's proposed here, and I see that there's others that could benefit from something like this. I get accused of being all about the fields, and always, with Alumni Field, I was the champion for Alumni Field for the Board of Selectmen. I'm proud of what we've got for Alumni Field. But I was president of baseball and softball for several years, and I have 5 kids, so I've been on the sidelines and at the fields, and that's how when we moved here 11 years ago, that's how we got involved, was through our kids. I don't think I have a friend in town that didn't come in some way, shape, or form through my children and their involvement in sports at school. And as far as the preservation, we mentioned a couple weeks ago with the decorated Christmas trees or Christmas decorations around the
Tree hunt.
tree hunt. Thank you. Brain dead. It's getting late. My family, we went out and we explored some of the trails, and to Paul's point, it's not quite the emerald necklace that we have in Boston, but we're spending a lot of money, and we're very cognizant of retaining as much as we can. But I have relatives that lived on Mattawanakie 60 years ago, and I'm sure that when Spartan Arrow or Cricket Lane or any number of neighborhoods went in, that they were probably up in arms, and they felt as though, what are you doing building up on Whitetail Way or behind the quarry, and there's a number of developments that I'm sure that Apple Dior or Grist Mill. So there comes a point where people own their land. It's their own asset, and with the 61A project, we get an opportunity. We get an opportunity to kick the tires, and we get a bite at the apple, essentially. And we've done that. I think we've kind of exercised. This is our 4th meeting on this subject, and we've tried to get as much input as possible to help us to make an educated decision, and taking everything into consideration. And you've been here for most of the night, I believe, and heard some of the other demands that are being put on our budget. And,
If I could just add, that one thing is.
Please do.
The point I'm attempting to make is saying, should you vote for right of first refusal? I'm not sure that you are, but if you did, I would volunteer, I'm sure others would volunteer, in saying we could start today, tomorrow, and bring money outside of the financial statement you're looking at through these different people that are in the town, these entities in the town. I think they would contribute. And it's not putting it on your shoulders, saying,
Yeah.
we could get a volunteering group, and we could start.
So I would love to see that happen.
Yeah.
I can tell you that I think for this, it is too late. I think we're just about ready to take a vote, and I'm not sure if I'm reading the board correctly, but I think what we're going to do is vote to waive the right of first refusal. But I would love to, Mr. Glady said that he'd get involved with some sort of can you step up and say that?
Yeah, and that's not a new cause for me, but if
Right.
it's time to get back at that level, and I think that's more at a citizen level than at the board level.
Correct.
Because it should be a private organization. I'm happy to get back involved in that.
But-
As well as reviewing how we approach it internally, and I'm glad Bonnie, brought that up. That would be, it's worth looking at how we, whether there's anything appropriate with the existing funds we've set up, or whether it's appropriate to set up another separate account, just to increase our arsenal. I mean, as time goes by, there's less out there and it costs more, so that's the reality we're gonna be up against. But, with that being said, and as someone who advocated, exercising the right of first refusal, that's not gonna happen, and I'm happy to support the hard work you folks put into coming up with the other alternative, so, I don't think we have anything to apologize for.
I agree.
Just do it.
I think we're ready to act. Entertain a motion?
Well, one of you guys who authored it,
I'll move that the Board of Selectmen vote as follows relative to the town's right of first refusal under MGL Chapter 61A, Section 14, to acquire the 11-acre Cricket Lane parcel, Assessor's Map R23-4-A, from Garrett T.P. Kavanaugh and Richard E. Kavanaugh, trustees of the George E. Jones Jr. Irrevocable Trust, George E. Jones III, and Mary Beth Misrovian for a bona fide offer of $1 million from R.E. Kennard Homes Incorporated.
one.
One, okay.
Thought you were debating.
No, option one, I just want to make sure. To authorize execution of a host community agreement with developer R.D. Kennard Homes Incorporated supporting a senior residential development on said parcel, and upon full execution of said host community agreement, to waive the town's right of first refusal.
Did you intentionally tail off on that? No, I'm not. Motion's been made
Second.
and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? It's 4-0.
You can first execute the host community agreement, and then execute the waiver of the right of first offer.
Want me to get you back in? Yeah, that'd be great, thank you. All right, do you want to do it right away?
3 copies of
All right, the only item we have left on our agenda, folks, if you want to stay, it's just going to take 2 minutes. It's just the minutes approval. We'll sign that now. Do you want a copy of it?
I wasn't present at that meeting, so
Sign
I
it now.
can't offer any of my
I mean,
snide
that meeting was
commentary.
3 months ago, so I don't know what the.
I wasn't there.
Yeah. I can't comment on the fidelity.
Can I just make one? Can I make one suggestion on the minutes, guys?
Yes.
On the member input section of the
Not a man who
minutes?
steals pens.
Are we listening?
Yeah.
On the member input section of the minutes, it says that I was commenting on the cross-country team winning their league. It was written as the lacrosse country team, so if we can just change lacrosse to cross. Other than that, I'm satisfied and will accept the motion.
Should we check with each other?
Mr. Knox, do you have any comments on the minutes that were set to approve?
From November?
I said Mr. Knox, not Mr. Glavy.
Oh, I just voted for you. Oh,
It was right there. I'm always heckling him.
right.
Mr. Chairman, no, I don't have any problem.
Thank you. I'll accept the motion to approve the minutes from,
I'll abstain, I wasn't there. All right.
so moved. Thank you. Second?
Second.
All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Abstention.
401. Thank you very much, folks. Our next meeting is February the 12th. Unless there's something else.
I heard 12th, I'm not.
Scheduling one of the schools
And perhaps at a FinCom meeting, right?
we'll work on it.
So we're going to.
I'm all for doing that,
Ed, get out of
but,
my camera.
and I love going over the numbers,
Oh,
but
it's
those
okay,
numbers
thank
didn't look a heck of a lot different than the
Camera
last
on.
time we went over them, and I'd like to get them, when there's,
FinCom?
well, no, the numbers we just had tonight didn't look a heck of a lot different to my eye than the last time we saw them, so. They weren't, so
Okay, so
Let's do it when it means something.
when is your meeting?
Well, our meeting's not until the 13th, but I just talked to
Mike?
Greg. We were just discussing, we need a meeting, and I talked to the board. We'll try to get a meeting between now and then, but
Just let us know.
so we can, but we'll have to coordinate a little.
Right. And we'll, I think that the preference would be for us to come to you.
Yeah.
So it'd be an
The week be-
Well,
the
honestly,
week
is there
be-
anything we need to do between now and the 13th, or is that too late to wait for this?
Well, I said, Mike.
Can we take a motion to adjourn and have this conversation?
Sure.
What do you think? Do you want to have this one? That's fine.
Oh, thank you very much.
Just scheduling.
It qualifies for outside of the meeting to discuss scheduling.
All right, motion to adjourn.
Second.
Moving second, all those in favor, signify by saying aye.
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 Okey-dokey.
Unanimous.